This is going to be a much different kind of video compared to ones I'd usually make. I'm not a drama channel. I don't intend on becoming a drama channel. So this very much is going to be the only kind of video I ever make like this. I'll also start out by saying this. Yes, I have a lot of bias going into this video since a few of the people involved are some of my closest best friends. I also just hold a lot of personal respect for some of the other people too. However, I also used to be decently close friends with the other party, who's gonna be the very person this video is gonna mostly be about. This former friend of mine has been causing a lot of grief and drama over issues that could have been solved in private years ago. Not only referring to what's happened recently, but this person has been causing issues for years as well. That person is TheChaosSpirit, aka Ceci or Cess. She's an artist on Twitter who, on February 10th, released a 93-page document attempting to clear her name over a statement that was made against her in November 2022. Her document also caused a large portion of the Sonic community to send endless amounts of harassment towards Doryan Nelson, Trey Nobles, and more prominently, Emmy Jones, who was probably discussed the most in Ceci's document. This online harassment also led to details about a private relationship of Emmy's from years ago to be aired out to the public, leading to Emmy and the other person's names trending for a day or so, and it literally just turned into bullying at that point. Meanwhile, Ceci remains relatively unharmed by everything she caused in February and seems to have gotten away with what she did. However, when you actually look back at what she was being accused of back in November, along with taking a look at the other involved perspectives, including an updated statement that Emmy herself posted, you might notice that there's still a lot of holes on Ceci's side that the other sides actually fill in. So in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at each of the statements and Twitlongers as they were released, and attempt to look at them as unbiased as I can. Though if I do notice anything off or maybe want to reference something else from a previous statement or Twitlonger, then I'll try doing that. I'm sure the first thing people are going to say when they watch this video is, Cooper, both parties have said that they just want to move on, you're disrespecting both their wishes by making this video. I actually agree. I do think both parties deserve to move on from this. However, it has not been particularly easy for one of them to move on considering the shitstorm of misinformation that happened in February. So much so that still to this day, random people are still bringing up this crap at random places. Because of that, I'm also going to be addressing a lot of the misinformation that's come from this situation, because they've really been doing more harm than good lately. Say what you will about this drama, but when you actually look back at everything that's happened, TheChaosSpirit did not end up trending when Doryan posted his initial statement. Speaking of which,
I'm running late to somewhere now I don't want to be.
on November 19th, 2022, Doryan Nelson released a statement in regard to his past experiences with TheChaosSpirit. The 7-page document detailed a series of issues that had been occurring between late 2017 all the way up to that very November. The main topic of Doryan's document is him addressing how Ceci has been making false sexual assault claims against him. One of the first things he gets out the way is that he didn't want to go public about this situation and has been trying to take care of it in private for years, but that Ceci had apparently been continuing to spread a defaming narrative about what happened between them at Sonic and Sega Fan Jam 2017. From Doryan's side of the story, Ceci was originally going to stay in a hotel with her boyfriend at the time, who's now currently her husband, Alex, aka Mr. Pasquale. However, shortly before Fan Jam 2017, Ceci was supposedly sent a video recording showing Alex cheating on her with another woman. Ceci went into a group call to talk about what happened, one that I was actually there for, and other people in the call who were also attending Fan Jam that year offered to help Ceci still go despite what happened with Alex. Ceci was initially staying with Emmy and a few other musicians, but she eventually decided to not stay there anymore since the room was apparently smelly, or smelled funny. Not an entirely relevant detail, but regardless, she ultimately decided to stay in Doryan's room since they were both on the art team. According to Doryan, Ceci was being very touchy with him while they were hanging out, even doing so in front of other people. Cec would also spend most of her time with Doryan, especially since they were actually talking about a lot of personal issues they had in common, like how both of them had recently gone through a breakup. This leads to a situation that's very he said, she said, but from Doryan's side of the story. At one point during the night while Ceci was staying in his room, they were both sleeping in the same bed, and Ceci began to get physically close with Doryan, to the point of cuddling. Doryan states that he wanted to make sure that she was okay with him returning this back to her, so he asked her multiple times if she was okay with this, which she replied yes to each time he asked. He apparently told her he liked her, and it just fell flat and they laughed it off. They talked for a bit, he gave her a kiss on the forehead, and the two fell asleep. The next day, Doryan noticed that Ceci was acting really strange around him, so he asked her if they could maybe talk about if everything was okay. She told him last night actually made her really uncomfortable and she walked away from him. Doryan says he was really confused by this, but he immediately decided to message her on Twitter to apologize for the misunderstanding. His statement included screenshots showing this. Ceci wasn't very receptive towards the apology, so Doryan decided to just keep his distance from her for the rest of the event, and so she could have some space. He would later find out that during the event, Ceci had been going around telling other people a very twisted version of her encounter and tried to say that Doryan had taken advantage of her while she was sleeping. But as Doryan shows from her DMs, this simply wasn't the case. Doryan claims that Ceci would go around telling her own, albeit very conflicting versions of what happened at FanJam 2017. He also said Ceci had posted a subtweet that was referencing her own version of the story, which made him upset. As a way to try sorting out their issue, Doryan decided to write a letter to Ceci explaining his point of view and even said he blamed himself for any misunderstanding that may have happened, and even apologized for it. Ceci would respond to it by saying she had a tendency to get close with anyone she was sleeping in the same bed with, but would also say she didn't care if the subtweet hurt his feelings, and would also accuse Doryan of using her because he had just recently gone through a breakup. A month later, Ceci and Doryan actually spoke about the situation again once things settled down, with Ceci telling him that she actually thought they were cool now. So to Doryan, this was just a horrible misunderstanding and was confident that they would be able to move on from it and repair their friendship. Or at least it seemed that way at first. In summer 2018, Doryan released a fan-made commercial for Sonic Mania, which ended up getting a lot of attention from the community at the time. Things were going pretty well, until Doryan came across a very weird tweet from Ceci that said something along the lines of seeing something on someone's timeline and can't separate art from the artist. Ceci unfortunately has a huge history of deleting tweets, so it's pretty unlikely that these got screen capped. These subtweets came off as a huge red flag to Doryan, especially considering the last time he had correctly suspected that Ceci was tweeting about him several months earlier. Because of this, Doryan decided to just completely steer clear of Ceci for the time being. This leads to Sonic Revolution 2019, a convention Doryan attended where he was sharing a table with Emmy Jones and voice actor Ryan Drummond. I was there, it was fun. But it turns out Ceci was also there and was sharing a table with Mr. Pasquale, since they actually got back together at that point. Despite them being in the same space together, Doryan would continue keeping his distance from Ceci, which was actually made pretty easy because I remember that they set up their tables in separate rooms. However, Ceci was actually bothered by how Doryan had kept keeping his distance from her in the following year, so she proceeded to message him on Twitter shortly after Revolution wrapped. They proceeded to try talking things out again, with Ceci stating again that she had moved on from the situation in 2017, and still wanted to be friends with him. This conversation actually ended pretty positively, with their friendship seemingly back to normal. This wouldn't last. During the time Doryan tried rekindling his friendship with Ceci, he again started hearing about how Ceci was still going around telling people a very twisted version of what happened in 2017. Even finding instances where she'd flat out use his own name and not bother trying to be secretive about it. She was also apparently telling versions of her story with incredibly vague details about what happened, going as far to say that Doryan had fondled her in her sleep, and even allegedly went as far to claim that what he did was sexual assault. While we're still on that, a friend of Doryan shared a DM they got from Ceci where she straight up admitted that she wasn't even sure if what happened between them was assault or harassment, despite her allegedly going around telling people that it was assault. It was also discovered that Ceci herself was actually pretty inconsistent with her own stories, sometimes claiming that she was able to remember everything vividly, and other times trying to claim that she couldn't remember all the details. She was apparently even going into voice calls and telling a bunch of random people about her story. Someone even reached out to her and would ask about a few of the inconsistencies in her own story, which she appeared to have gotten super defensive over. These types of situations apparently kept persisting, leading up to Sonic and Sega FanJam 2022, a whole 5 years since 2017. Originally, Doryan and Emmy were going to host a panel for a fan series they made in 2020, Sonic and Tails R, where they were also going to be joined by Ryan Drummond. However, the staff for FanJam ended up getting brought into a private call by Ceci and her now husband, Alex. Going off details that Emmy and Doryan were told about the call from the staff, both Ceci and Alex had confronted them about how Doryan was going to be attending Sonic and Sega FanJam 2022, and brought up these sexual assault allegations from 5 years ago. Ceci supposedly told them that if they didn't ban Doryan from the event, then she would post a public document about the situation back in 2017, and that the FanJam event itself would end up getting caught in the crossfire, essentially threatening to blackmail the whole team. Doryan was disappointed to hear about this, so he would actually make the decision himself to not attend FanJam that year, just so Ceci wouldn't publish her document and it wouldn't affect innocent people on the team who did nothing wrong. Because of this, the Sonic and Tails R panel had to be cancelled due to Emmy's ongoing health issues, which she would announce on Twitter. Here's the context of her health issues as explained by Doryan in his statement if you guys want to pause and maybe read for yourselves. After FanJam 2022 came and went, Ceci had also supposedly claimed in private that she was still going to make the document she threatened the FanJam staff with. However, when she didn't make one after the event was over, Doryan took it upon himself to write his own statement, which is what I'm looking at right now. He closes off his statement by reaffirming that he never meant any harm to come to Ceci and didn't want to go public about the situation. But after everything Ceci had said and done in private for 5 to 6 years at this point, he had no choice but to come forward. He also mentions likely looking into any legal action he can take about the situation because making an accusation like this and for years can be extremely damaging and dangerous, especially if it's false. And even after all of that, he still affirms that Ceci had every right to feel uncomfortable about their situation, even if it was just a misunderstanding. He closes the statement with an open letter to Ceci, simply asking her to leave him alone and not to contact him ever again. That was Doryan's statement, and it's a lot to take in. I think the one thing I really notice about his statement is how just focused it really seemed. He doesn't try beating around the bush on any details and stays on topic, only mentioning details from other parties as long as it stayed tied to the whole situation. I know that sounds like a very basic compliment to give someone's statement, but this will actually become very important to remember for later. Trust me. I am going to be providing links to every statement and or Twitlonger looked at in this video, so if you guys felt that I was maybe missing a detail or lacking context, then you can go read them for yourselves if you wish. The reaction to Doryan's statement was relatively decent. There were some detractors, but overall, an okay portion of the community were in support of Doryan for speaking up. Even one of the FanJam staff members, Patrick, posted the screenshot of an email he nearly sent Ceci after she threatened to blackmail the team, basically to help support the claim that Ceci was saying these harmful things. Obviously, the one person who had the strongest reaction to the statement was the one it was about in the first place. Ceci, not too long after Doryan's post, made a pretty lengthy Twitlonger describing her side of the story and clarifying more details about what happened. From Ceci's side, she doesn't make any mention of being touchy with Doryan in front of other people, and also leaves out the detail that she and Alex broke up at the time because he had cheated on her. She claims that during the night, she fell asleep and woke up to Doryan already cuddling her. She mentions having a history of nightmares and sleep terrors around that time, which would cause her to wake up often during night. She says during one of these nightmares, she woke up to Doryan cuddling her, and when he asked if she was okay with this, she said she told him yes because she thought that he was asking if she was okay from her nightmare. She doesn't mention Doryan asking multiple times like he did. She also said she didn't actually give consent to Doryan cuddling her because consent cannot be given by someone who is groggy. And I will clarify this in case like anyone watches and maybe accuses me of being a monster for looking over this. I totally get where Ceci's coming from when she says that groggy people cannot give consent. I actually do agree with it. But the problem is that Doryan said he asked for consent multiple times and she said yes each time. From that point of view, it seemed like Doryan wasn't aware that she was groggy until she sent him that DM saying she was, which is why I personally feel that this was just a huge misunderstanding. But getting back to her Twitlonger, Ceci then talks about how she woke up later that morning to Doryan spooning her, which she was apparently awake during. After an awkward back and forth, she told him to go back to sleep, and made an effort to leave the hotel room after Doryan began snoring. She reaffirms a lot of her feelings from back then that the situation just made her uncomfortable. She then decides to make mention of a different situation for the first time, which is a little concerning to read about. After being uncomfortable with what happened with Doryan, Ceci ended up having no place to stay again. So she decided to stay with a different unnamed person who would later do a really horrible thing to her that I'm not gonna say out loud. This is one of the only times she really talks about this in the Twitlonger, and based on the details I've been told by multiple people who were close with Ceci back then, this unfortunately did actually happen. Regardless of my personal feelings towards Ceci now, this was a fucking horrible thing to have happen to her, and it makes me sick to my stomach that this other person is probably still out there somewhere completely unpunished. Sadly, the rest of the Twitlonger doesn't really give more detail about who did this to her, though she does make mention that this horrible incident unfortunately led her to not being able to heal from the Doryan situation. And if that part's true, then that's really unfortunate. When I first read this part of the Twitlonger back in November, it left me so fucking shocked and confused, but I think I'll try discussing this more in different parts of the video. Again, everything will be linked in the description for you guys to go read for yourselves, but I do want to say I think my biggest issue with Ceci's response here is how disorganized and unfocused it is. Though she does clarify at the top that she was live streaming when Doryan's statement was posted, so it's definitely likely that his statement caught her completely off guard, and she very much felt that she needed to rush out a response as quickly as possible. But trying to summarize other parts as best as I could, she states that she wasn't ready to come out about her side, saying she was being forced to. There's one part where she mentions sometime after she got back together with Alex, in May 2019, he asked her what happened between her and Doryan. She describes that she had a mental breakdown while retelling everything that happened with Doryan, along with telling Alex about the other incident where she sadly was assaulted. After talking about it with Alex and, quote, another friend, they both apparently told her that this was misconduct on Doryan's part, so she decided to, quote, completely pull away from this person and did not communicate with him at all. Okay, Ceci is straight up lying in this part. Like, I'm not doubting that she had a conversation like this with Alex and the other friend, but I'm mainly referring to the part where she says that she completely pulled away from communication with Doryan at all. That part's completely not true. Remember, she said that this conversation happened in May 2019, which was also 1 month before that year's Sonic Revolution. And if you can remember from Doryan's statement, which he literally had screenshots of, she reached out to him and their conversation actually went really well, with them wanting to be friends again. So, in her Twitlonger, why didn't Ceci make any mention of this conversation happening? Why would she willingly be messaging the same person who apparently made her have a mental breakdown when describing their situation to Alex 1 month prior? That doesn't really add up. She instead decides to fast forward to 2022, when she learned Doryan was initially going to go to FanJam that year, saying it made her anxious, which led to the call with the FanJam staff. She says that in the call, she was just talking to 2 other staff members, and her husband Alex joined later. Alex shared his opinion on Doryan attending, and pretty strongly suggested that it was inappropriate for him to go after what happened with Ceci 5 years ago. She didn't make any mention of threatening to blackmail the staff if they didn't ban Doryan, and she also doesn't make any mention of the email that Patrick tweeted out, though she did respond to his tweet with screenshots of unrelated DMs that don't really prove anything. But getting back to her Twitlonger, she claims to have reached out to Emmy to talk about what happened, but their conversation, quote, went in circles as Emmy was upset over her health, stating she did understand this, but also tried saying she has her own health issues to worry about. She also claims that if she were in the same room with Doryan after what happened 5 years ago, she would either throw up or become lightheaded since he himself is a huge trigger for her, despite both of them going to Sonic Revolution 2019, which again, she doesn't bother to bring up. After the Sonic and Tails R panel was officially cancelled, Ceci says she tried to reach out to apologize, but Emmy didn't respond, though she does say she had a conversation with Trey about it. She messaged Trey trying to say that she never tried to get Doryan banned from the event, says that she was then gaslit about the events that happened, eventually saying she was going to avoid Emmy's group at the convention altogether. She also claims that she wasn't going to go public at all even after the convention, and also tries to say that she didn't actually go around publicly telling people about her situation with Doryan, even saying that she and Doryan are, quote, the only people who can testify what happened on that night. Keep that in mind for later. She ends her Twitlonger by saying she didn't wish Doryan to be harassed and claims again that she was essentially being forced to post her side. The response to Ceci's Twitlonger was pretty mixed from what I saw. I'm sure that her followers were giving her support, and I'm also sure a few of them went give Doryan shit, which she specifically asked them not to. But overall, I think the most rational response seemed to have been from people saying that we're not really going to know the full extent about what happened in 2017, since only those 2 were actually there. I think that's a fair conclusion. We're never going to have a clear answer to this, and Ceci herself even said in her Twitlonger that only her and Doryan can testify about this. This wouldn't be the end of the story, though. Not too long after Ceci posted her Twitlonger, Emmy decided to post her own Twitlonger to help clarify some points that were being made between Doryan's statement and Ceci's post. Emmy recollects that while she and Doryan were brought into a staff call about FanJam 2022, which was not too long after Ceci and Alex had apparently spoken to them. In Emmy and Doryan's call, they were told by the staff that Ceci herself allegedly stated, "This is sexual assault," referring to the situation in 2017. It was also claimed that Ceci apparently told them, even if I wasn't going to the event, Doryan should be blacklisted, with Emmy even pointing out that Ceci lied to her privately about not wanting Doryan to be banned. And apparently in that call, a really inappropriate comparison was made about how if Emmy had been the one assaulted, then they would act accordingly and make sure whoever was banned. If that part's true, that's not a great look for Ceci or Alex. Emmy says as a sexual assault victim herself, a comment like that was really insensitive, especially hearing it come from Ceci since the two were still friends at this point. Emmy says a conversation did happen between her and Ceci, but it was not as sympathetic as Ceci made it out to be in her Twitlonger. She says Ceci apparently told her something like, "It is unfortunate that me speaking up inconveniences you and your series." Holy shit. Emmy says it was never about that and she knew Ceci was aware of that too. Emmy tried to calmly and respectfully tell Ceci about how the situation made her feel, since she herself had asked, and also how it was going to affect her health. The conversation apparently went south with Ceci using Emmy's own words and intentions against her, so Emmy decided to place a boundary on Ceci and moved on from the conversation. Emmy also decided to call out another incredibly insensitive comment that Ceci made where she claimed we have health issues of a similar degree. This would lead to Emmy having to explain her current health situation that's been going on for a while. You guys can pause the video and read all of this for yourselves if you wish. And if any of you want to hear at least one person testify to this, I've visited Emmy in person on multiple occasions over the course of 4 years, and I've literally witnessed her suffer from these health issues firsthand, so she is not exaggerating about anything here. Emmy also mentions that Ceci did offer to help her with her health problems, but explains that the reason she declined this was because of an experience she had with Ceci a few years back that unfortunately helped lead her to her current health issues. While Emmy was hanging out with Ceci one year, Ceci apparently spiked Emmy's drink with medication without her permission, since she had a high fever at the time. Emmy says that while she knew Ceci was trying to look out for her and help, she didn't consent to being given medication, and this would heavily affect her in the long run, with her to this day still trying to work with letting other close people in her life give her food or drinks. Around the same time Ceci posted her Twitlonger, she and Alex had tried bringing up on Twitter about how Doryan had supported Hunted P in the past, an artist who worked on Sonic Adventure 2, who was also involved in a completely different situation a few years back that concerned Emmy. Pretty much they tried weaponizing this completely unrelated situation against Doryan as an effort to make him and even Emmy look worse. Emmy also decided to address this since she did not appreciate them exploiting an old situation that had already been taken care of, with her providing more details about how it got sorted out in private, and Emmy had long since moved on from it. Emmy ends her Twitlonger by talking about the cheating situation, stating while she understands the other party wishing to retain privacy, she affirms that it was still important to mention in Doryan's statement since it affected a lot about what happened that weekend. And she closes off her post by saying that she felt that her clarifications were necessary in order to help people see a bigger picture. And that was Emmy's Twitlonger, and while I'm sure there's going to be a few people who try to bring up, why did Emmy even get involved? Well, seeing how Ceci and even Pasquale were continuing to share what Emmy felt was misinformation, I think she had every right to want to clear some things up, especially since she was getting mentioned by both Doryan and Ceci. While the reaction to Ceci's Twitlonger was met with mixed responses, the added details to these situations that came from Emmy's Twitlonger actually did turn a few people's heads. Some people were pointing out how there were a lot more inconsistencies when it came to Ceci's side, and more specifically, the story Emmy told about how Ceci had essentially drugged her without her consent had caused a decent amount of people to call out Ceci. Her responses on Twitter trying to justify this was her basically trying to say that she had no other choice since Emmy refused to go to the hospital. She did say that she felt guilty about the whole thing, but people were still pretty understandably upset that Ceci even did this to Emmy. There were some people defending Ceci's case, one of which being Super Egg, who was even called out for essentially trying to defend Ceci for drugging Emmy, which was not the best move. He did eventually realize that he was totally speaking out of line and apologize for it, which Emmy did respond to, so the whole situation was taken care of, at least for now. About 4 days after everything was posted, Ceci would tweet another statement, written this time in notes on her phone. It's a pretty short statement and specifically addresses the relationship she had with Alex over the years. Here she says that while cheating did happen, she states that there is no video evidence of it. Which yes, to this day, the video has never been proven to be real. She explains that during the brief period in 2017 when they first started dating, Alex was also apparently in an unfortunate toxic relationship at the time, which ultimately led to him cheating on Ceci. They split it off immediately afterwards and grew distant, until a year later when they decided to rekindle their friendship, which eventually led to Ceci giving him a second chance. They would date again for 3 years until finally marrying. Ceci would then say that she did not appreciate her cheating situation with Alex being used as ammo against them, and said that it shouldn't have been publicized without our consent. You are one to talk after the drugging situation. Also clarifying that her relationship problems in the past were no one else's business but her own. Remember that part. She closes her statement by declaring that she didn't want to keep publicly arguing about the situation, and asks everyone to leave her and Alex alone. And that was it. I will say this, Ceci and Alex had every right to be frustrated about their relationship problems in the past getting aired out by Doryan, but at the same time, it feels a little strange to make it out like it wasn't important to mention about what happened in 2017. Like, yeah, I think anyone would be pissed the fuck off if a document was written about them, and a detail like that got leaked out, but people shouldn't forget that Alex cheating on Ceci did lead to her not having a place to stay at FanJam as a result. Now, I don't think Alex should be given full blame for all the bad stuff that happened to Ceci at FanJam because of his mistake, but I personally think it's a little foolish to act like mentioning it at all wasn't necessary to the whole situation. Plus, if the FanJam staff were actually threatened by the two of them, as Doryan and Emmy were told, along with all the other insensitive comments that were made in the alleged call, then I don't know what else to say. It's a little hard for me to have sympathy for these two at the moment, especially nowadays. When push comes to shove, I wasn't there, Emmy and Doryan also weren't there, so the only people who truly know the contents of the staff call are the two staff members, Ceci and Alex. Though I would be a little hard pressed to wonder why the FanJam staff would severely lie about these details to both Emmy and Doryan, along with needing to type out that email that was sent to Ceci. Yeah, things aren't adding up on Ceci's end. And that's pretty much everything that happened in November. It was a decently known topic at the time, some people were upset, some people were disappointed, and unfortunately harassment did occur on both ends. But over time, most of the community kinda just moved on. That's usually always the case for internet drama, people just get bored of a certain topic and move on. For the next few months, Ceci would set her Twitter to private, Emmy and Doryan moved on with their lives, and it seemed like this misunderstanding from 5 to 6 years ago was finally put to rest in the public eye. Though behind the scenes, Ceci would complain to Trey about how she was still being harassed, and asked if he or Emmy could do something about it. Trey DM'd the person to leave her alone, and Emmy would make a tweet denouncing anyone saying horrible shit to Ceci. Mainly since that's really all they could actually do. This is another topic altogether, but there really isn't much that a person can do to stop all their followers from harassing a person. The most you could really do on the receiving end is just block people, and that's it. This mainly seems to be an issue on Twitter specifically, and there's no real clear way on how you could even fix this because it's persisted on the site for years. It's basically become just a regular part of its reputation. But getting back to Ceci, nothing else really came from the November situation apart from her messaging Trey to get people to stop harassing her. A lot of it was out of their control because, really think about it, Emmy can't just tell all 40k followers of hers what to do. That doesn't make sense. But this probably could have been the end of all this. Perhaps Ceci, Alex, Emmy, and Doryan could have moved on with their lives and just not have to worry about each other ever again. That was until just 3 months later.
She is my drama queen. She's so wet and reckless.
While Ceci mentioned in her last statement that she didn't want to keep publicly arguing with people about November, this would ultimately not be the case. Apparently, and as far back as December, Ceci had begun typing up the very document that she had allegedly threatened the FanJam staff with. This time, however, Doryan would not be the only one she would go after, along with not even being the main focus of her situation anymore. On February 10th, 2023, Ceci released a 93-page document titled R.E. Doryan Nelson, Emmy Jones, Trey Nobles. And it's gonna be a lot for me to look through. Okay, I am gonna be linking this with everything for other people to look at for themselves, but starting off, it's an incredibly disorganized and bloated document that constantly jumps from topic to topic, and only in the span of a few pages. And there's 93 of them to read through. I'm not even sure where to begin with all of this, but I'll try summarizing it the way it's presented. Ceci starts out by saying she began writing this document in December 2022, stating that she tried spending a lot of time off social media to focus on her mental health. Brings up how she stated not wanting to continue this drama due to Emmy's bad health, but says she decided to come forward after being exhausted for weeks, sacrificing my own health and someone else's. She claims that for the last month, she and Alex have been harassed by Doryan and Emmy's fans and friends, which apparently led to people online trying to get Alex fired from his editing job, and accusing him of allegations that don't exist. She doesn't appear to clarify what the allegations even were. After saying she couldn't take it anymore and that she was going to die if the drama persisted. She messaged Trey trying to send an apology to Emmy about the drugging thing, but she also told him that she didn't appreciate her personal drama being aired out without her permission. But in the first screenshot she shows, she doesn't actually say that part. Trey did tell her that they just wanted Doryan to be left alone after everything Ceci had put him through, to which Ceci tried telling Trey that she never tried to cancel Doryan, but that they did that to her. Ceci then talks about what happened at FanJam 2017 again. The story she tells here is pretty identical to the one she told in November, including that nightmares reasoning that she had described. Overall, it still sounds like just a misunderstanding, and the two probably could have just talked things out after some time, which they did, twice. She uses a screenshot from Doryan's 2017 letter where he mentions that he wasn't even asleep during that night. Ceci reaffirms her belief that a person can't fully give consent if they're half asleep or groggy. She mentions the spooning part again, and adds more to how Doryan apparently admitted to liking her at that point, but she told him to shut up and go to sleep. She shares a DM from Trey trying to show that Doryan has been lying about the situation to his friends to this day, using another excerpt from his 2017 letter where he admitted to having a crush on her at the time, along with the Twitter DMs from 2017 where he admitted this too. Shortly after leaving the bed, Ceci went to the bathroom to shower and she messaged Emmy about what happened. She didn't respond immediately because she was still asleep at the time. Ceci says again that she felt that she was being taken advantage of, and also shares that before that night, she had apparently never slept in the same bed with another man before, apart from family members. After leaving the hotel room, she would message another friend about what happened and they talked about it for a bit. She blocks out who it was. She continued on by talking about how she was prepping for the convention later that day, and a few of the staff had kept asking her if she was doing okay. Doryan then caught up with her and asked if everything was alright, which is when she told him that it wasn't. This lines up with Doryan's side too. She says he did message her shortly after, which we do have screenshots of, so I'm just gonna assume that Doryan was true to his word again and decided to keep his distance from Ceci for the rest of the convention. But in her document, she shares another story from FanJam where Emmy showed up and asked Ceci if she was doing okay, and after expressing to her what happened for the first time, Emmy got really angry about Doryan and apparently mentioned to Ceci how Doryan had kissed her earlier that day. Ceci claims that Emmy had phrased this as if Doryan had forcefully kissed her, but according to a screenshot from Trey, this wasn't what the context was. Emmy and Doryan kissed one time after he asked her, and she gave consent to it. Also, according to Emmy, this happened a few days before the event, not the day of, so why is this random scenario even being brought up? Ceci also makes mention of how Emmy was in a private relationship with a public figure at the time, and also almost passive-aggressively states, unlike Emmy and Doryan, I have an understanding that personal fucking relationships don't need to be shared with thousands of people. I get the feeling she was typing this out of frustration because the whole cheating thing got aired out. Also, I'm sure Ceci making a quick mention of Emmy's private relationship won't backfire horribly later. But getting back to the document, what does Emmy agreeing to give one kiss to Doryan have to do with everything else? After she heard Ceci's side of the situation, Emmy did go yell at Doryan for both of them because the story really did upset her at first. But Ceci weirdly tries to use the kissing Doryan thing against her to try diminishing how she went stand up for her, even though Emmy wasn't even aware about the situation between Ceci and Doryan until after she kissed him. Yeah, that part doesn't really add up. Back to the event, Ceci says that after Doryan was being, quote, chewed out by other friends, which implies that Emmy was not the only one who confronted Doryan about the situation, she didn't see him at the con anymore, again confirming Doryan's side that he kept his distance from her. After the convention, Ceci claims that Emmy left her behind to go to an after party, and then, in a pretty messed up way of wording what happened next, Ceci pretty much implies that because Emmy, quote, left her behind, she had no choice but to stay at the same hotel with the other man who did hurt her. Yeah, she makes mention of this incident again, and she also still doesn't reveal the name of who did this to her. But I guess moving on to what happened after FanJam 2017, Ceci brings up the letter Doryan sent her shortly after apologizing, which Ceci showed a screenshot from this letter and underlined a part that made it seem like Doryan was aware she was sleeping when cuddling happened. She again denies sending mixed signals to Doryan at all, and also tries to claim that they never had a conversation about his feelings towards her at the time. She reshares the same screenshot from Doryan's statement about her describing the nightmares thing, while also stating she didn't have access to these full DMs anymore because Doryan deactivated his old Twitter account for, quote, being called out for something else, but claims that he and his friends have all of them and have also withheld them? I assume she said this in reference to how in Doryan's statement, there was the one person who confronted Ceci in DMs DMs about her telling inconsistent stories about Doryan to random people, and how that person mentioned having context to everything. I'm not 100% sure if this is the only friend of Doryan's who did this to Ceci, but I feel like if Doryan was gonna type up this whole statement and include the screenshots he did, I don't entirely understand why he would withhold important details the way Ceci is implying. But anyways, Ceci mentions in her document about how she still felt Doryan was using her after his recent relationship at the time had ended, and then tries claiming that Doryan's friends have been spreading lies about how Ceci would publicly talk about Doryan to random people. She mainly tries to incriminate Trey in this and shares a conversation they had where he tried to tell her about how she would go tell people in her server about it, which is kind of an issue because Ceci's server is the public one. Ceci responded by saying she would only ever discuss it in a private chat called Dark Garden. They would discuss this for a bit and Trey thanks her for the clarification. Right underneath those screenshots is a pretty damn important part of Ceci's document that I don't think a lot of people are even focusing on. Ceci outright states that what happened between her and Doryan was not sexual assault. Though when I get to discussing the initial public reaction this document had, all I'll say for now is I don't think a lot of people even saw this part. Moving on, Ceci brings up that the only evidence that people have of her describing what Doryan did as sexual assault is the DM she sent to Doryan's friend where she said that she didn't understand if what happened was even sexual assault or harassment. She says the situation is complex because it's impossible to know Doryan's true intentions. She reiterates again that she never referred to the situation as sexual assault and has also never referred to Doryan as a predator. She also states that she only ever referred to assault when it came to the other person who actually did that to her. But once again, I doubt people read this part of her document. She restates that what Doryan did made her uncomfortable and decided to stop fighting with him for the time being, since they shared a friend group and didn't want to cause friction with anyone. This takes me to the part of the document where she brings up FanJam 2018, something both Emmy and Doryan never talked about on their ends. Here, Ceci describes how Patrick, the lead staff member for FanJam, would apparently vent to her about how Doryan was apparently pissed at him for, quote, replacing him with Ceci, shortly after what happened the previous year. Ceci also decides to reveal that Patrick had apparently been shit-talking Emmy and Doryan around this time, and, it's not a very good look for him, that's all I'll say. But I'm also a little confused why Ceci is even bringing any of this up, apart from trying to make Patrick look bad. Like, sure, he is venting about Emmy and Doryan here, and it looks pretty bad. But kinda like the Emmy kissing Doryan thing, what does any of this have to do with everything else? This does lead to her talking about the Twitter DMs with Doryan from 2019, where she was asking him about how he got mad at Patrick over being replaced. But their conversation made it seem like this was also just a misunderstanding. And like I showed earlier, it ended pretty positively. Ceci also doesn't seem to make mention about how these are the same DMs that she herself initiated shortly after Sonic Revolution 2019, and literally left out the part where she said she was being bothered by how Doryan was avoiding her at the convention, which is a little weird. Why'd you leave that part out, Cecilia? I guess that she wanted to make mention about how some confusion happened during FanJam 2018, but did it really warrant leaking those shitty DMs from Patrick from like 5 years ago? Why was this part necessary at all? Makes me wonder if she only put all of this here just because Patrick tweeted that email. Speaking of topics that have nothing to do with the big picture, Ceci, for some weird reason, once again brings up the Hunted P situation with Emmy where she shows screenshots of Doryan retweeting Hunted's statement, and also showing private messages from Emmy on Twitter of her being upset at Doryan for retweeting that. She also includes Discord DMs of Doryan trying to justify this. I understand that Ceci put this here to maybe have people go, wow, look how shitty and awful Doryan is for retweeting this person who was harassing Emmy at the time. How could Emmy continue supporting such an awful person? Here's the thing, Emmy already sorted this situation out long ago. She even talked about this in her Twitlonger from November. So unless Ceci didn't read Emmy's Twitlonger addressing this, or she just forgot, why is she still trying to weaponize this completely unrelated situation against Doryan? Ceci even mentions in her own document that Emmy and Doryan made up from this, so why is she even bothering bringing it up? Apart from trying to make Doryan look bad. Like yeah, Emmy and Doryan have long since moved on from it, but I guess since Ceci still hasn't, she can still bring it up. 37 pages in, Ceci turns the focus of the document towards Emmy, who's one of Doryan's best friends. She claims that she was a teen in high school when she first met Emmy in 2016. She brings up how she and Emmy stayed friends until a falling out occurred a few years ago concerning an old drama about how when Emmy allegedly scammed someone out of their money concerning a commission that apparently cost around $200. She tells her own version of the drama, and honestly, this was from years ago, and it was also resolved, so I don't really understand why she's mentioning this. I get that that this was the catalyst that broke them off as friends first, it still seems pretty pointless to mention in the whole grand scheme of things. And just for the record, I was there when this first friendship ended, and Emmy was the one who chose to end it because of Ceci's behavior at the time. But moving on, after they broke it off as friends, Ceci writes that the next time Emmy interacted with her was when her daughter was buying one of her posters at a convention. I'm assuming Sonic Revolution 2019. To which Emmy initiated public contact with her, which quote, sketched her out. Okay, she words it really weird here, but just to clear up any confusion, Emmy and Ceci did not interact at all at Sonic Revolution. Or at least not that I recall, because I was actually there. What happened was, Emmy's daughter bought one of Ceci's posters, and Emmy posted a tweet about it a day later. I'm not really sure why Ceci worded it here like Emmy spoke to her at the convention or something. Emmy's daughter was with her dad when she bought the posters, since Emmy herself wasn't allowed to leave her table. There was one time she had to step away because she had a headache, but that was kind of it. Ceci and Emmy did not talk to each other there. Also, timeline-wise, Emmy's tweet was made after Ceci and Doryan had spoken to each other in DM shortly after Revolution. You know, the one where they appeared to be on good terms again. Emmy was made aware of that, and that's why she felt comfortable posting this tweet at the time. Anyways, shortly after this, Ceci says she reconnected with Emmy, but that she would take it slow this time around, claiming she never wanted to fight with Emmy because she would get defensive or can't handle criticism. Once again, Ceci brings up another off-topic point where she talks about Emmy's history of health problems. She brings up her eating disorder symptoms, which she has been pretty open about publicly, but also proceeds to show screenshots of a private conversation they had where Emmy was talking about her long COVID complications. Ceci, why was leaking any of this necessary? I get that you tried justifying this in red text by saying, Emmy is very public about her health now, but that doesn't really give you the right to leak these very private conversations she clearly trusted you to keep secret. Do you want to talk about her eating disorder problems or her health problems in general? The only reason I could see Ceci trying to justify all of this is because she's probably still upset about the drugging situation, which she does delve into much later. Ceci then mentions how she also struggles with eating disorders, and would try helping Emmy through her own struggles from time to time, since she emphasized with her problems. She says that trying to help her through these recent issues is one of the main things that made her become close with Emmy again, saying that she would grieve every time something awful happened to Emmy, and also says that Emmy does not deserve any of the shit that constantly gets flung at her. Of course, after saying something very positive and reassuring about her own friend, the next fucking page shoots this down immediately by Ceci delving into how their friendship was actually incredibly unhealthy. Ceci claims here that Emmy would constantly search her name on Twitter for the sake of finding people talking shit about her, just so she can complain about it, framing it as watching people who dislike her like a hawk. She also throws in a comment about how Trey would always be in the replies of tweets defending Emmy constantly, which he would do a lot, but I don't really see what the issue is. And going off the document for a bit, even before February 2023, people would still harass the fucking shit out of Emmy daily for years. So no, Emmy did not have to go looking for it like Ceci's suggesting. Trust me, guys. But back to the document. Ceci says, I understand it's difficult and hurtful for people to dislike you online, but it is incredibly unhealthy to constantly check for it. Which is pretty sound advice that Ceci herself actually proves later on that she doesn't even follow. Regardless, Ceci then talks about how she was visiting Emmy's place in the summer of 2022, when it was actually September when she visited, but that's beside the point, and claims that Emmy made everyone visiting hate watch a YouTuber. She also claims that Emmy made them cancel going to a meetup they had planned because a person who was apparently going talked bad about Sonic and Tails R in a video. Okay. Ceci says that every chat she had with Emmy was about drama, situations where people victimized her, or people talking about her. She then says, and I, being naive, just wanted to sit there for a moment. But she says that she would always try to help Emmy. She then talks about how when she was a teen, she would give Emmy so much of her money out of love and pity for her situation. For those who aren't aware, when Emmy and Ceci first became friends, Emmy was still living in an unfortunately abusive home life back in Ohio. I befriended her around this time too, and it was really fucking rough seeing her go through this. But thankfully, she did move out in early 2019 and has been trying to heal from it since. Ceci then goes on to say over the course of their first friendship, as a teenager, okay, she keeps trying to word it like this, so I'm just gonna clear this up right now. Ceci's birthday is September 19th, 1997. I know this not because I looked it up, but from when I was still decently close friends with her in 2017 and 2018, and I literally just asked her at one point as a friend. Ceci and Emmy first spoke to each other online in April 2016, as she showed at the top of the 2022 Emmy and I section. So by the time they first spoke to each other, Ceci was 18 and was approaching 19. I don't care who you are, that's not teenager. Yes, it's still technically teen, but Ceci was literally an adult when she met Emmy. So I'm not really big on how she's trying to paint it like she was this super young person in comparison to Emmy. Emmy's only like 4 years older than Ceci. It's really not that severe. But anyways, as a teenager, Ceci says that she had given Emmy close to $1,000 at that point, would help pay for her trips, meals, and did fundraisers where she would do commissions for her at the point of burnout and depression, claiming doing work for Emmy seemed never ending. Saying even as a teenager, Emmy would rely on her for emotional support like she was a therapist. She also claims that if people didn't give Emmy advice that didn't approve of her constant sulking, then her other friends would shit on them in a private chat and isolate them. Ceci says that she would have to keep so many secrets from Emmy to keep her from being exposed, leading to her defending and creating excuses for her for years. She then suddenly brings up how Emmy abandoned her at FanJam 2017 again, and she pretty much paints it like because Emmy abandoned her, it led to her having no place to stay and led to Ceci getting harmed by that other person. Despite my personal feelings, I do feel legitimately awful that Ceci went through this horrible experience. But I also don't think wording it like it was Emmy's fault was the best move. She does try to soften it by saying she didn't blame her for what happened, but it's too fucking late, Ceci! You chose to word it in this really bad way so people will read it and think horrible implications about Emmy. So either you rephrase the whole sentence or just don't mention it like this at all. Moving on. She claims that Emmy had taken advantage of their friendship and would disregard her anytime Ceci didn't do what she wanted. Interesting. Ceci then tries to shame Emmy for how she made a public spectacle about her trauma, and was upset for how Emmy blamed her for her health problems after Ceci drugged her, and also tried giving her shit for not admitting it to her face, claiming she held on to the mistake for 6 years. But she did forgive her for it previously, just so she could post about it on social media for her 40,000 followers once Ceci crossed her. So wait, you say Emmy never admitted this to your face, but you also say Emmy forgave you for it previously? Am I misreading something? Ceci ends this part by saying there will always be a part of her that still feels bad for Emmy, but also tries to say that Emmy can't possibly be the victim of every situation she finds herself in. Ceci reaffirms that she wasn't a perfect friend either, but sometimes you have to understand that you are part of the problem. Huh. We're only halfway through the document, by the way. The next section Ceci talks about is how Emmy allegedly encourages other Twitter accounts to spread harassment towards certain Twitter users, mentioning the likes of ZealousFox, Off, and later herself and Alex. This is another part of her document that has practically nothing to do with anything else, but if she's gonna bring this stuff up, it's a little weird that she's trying to stand up for these two in particular. To summarize, Zealous is kind of a self-centered asshole who's been harassing Emmy online for years, and Off is a bit of a weirdo who also harassed Emmy in the past. I don't know why Ceci was trying to speak up for these two here, but that's her hill to die on, I guess. Actually, she does mention one of the reasons why Emmy was trying to cancel ZealousFox, and it was apparently because he ships Son Tails, which is a very controversial topic at the moment. So it's at this point of the document where Ceci decides to essentially expose Emmy using old, albeit out of context screenshots, one of which showing Emmy talking about having Sonic porn in 2017, and a different 2020 DM of her talking about her now outdated opinions on Sonic character ships. This is easily going to be one of the more controversial topics mentioned in this video, and I might just save it for a different time. But when it actually comes to talking about Ceci's document at the moment, here's my main question. What was the point of mentioning any of this? Remember when this situation was about Doryan Nelson? You know, misinterpreting Ceci cuddling him? Why are we talking about private DMs Ceci got from Emmy years ago of her talking about Sonic ships and NSFW? And to make it worse, the Sonic porn screenshot doesn't even line up with what Ceci's even trying to accuse Emmy of. Like, when you actually look at it, it proves nothing. And what does any of this have to do with the entirety of the situation from November? It honestly feels like Ceci knew she didn't have a lot to disprove about Doryan's statement, so she just dug up dirt on everyone else involved just so she can use it against them for no reason. She's purposely trying to steer the conversation into being about something else for the sake of people not being angry at her about the legitimate problem she was causing back in November. I seriously went into this video trying to approach every document as unbiased as I can, but hopefully with how I've been trying to look over everything so far, maybe some of you can see why it's completely impossible for me to do this. Again, I'm gonna be linking every statement and other stuff related to these topics in the description, so you guys can go read this for yourselves and see that I'm not trying to fuck with anyone here. Ceci's document is an unfocused mess. I'm not saying she wasn't allowed to make a response defending herself, but why is this the way she did it? Why is she mentioning all of this unrelated and pointless crap? Her Twitlonger was also similar in how disorganized it felt, but it was also very clearly rushed out. However, I would actually give more credit to her Twitlonger because while it wasn't as well structured either, it still stayed on topic. She wasn't bringing up 10 or 12 different subjects every couple of paragraphs. Believe what you want to believe, but I'm telling you guys, this document comes off kinda calculated. But getting back to it, Ceci does finally loop back to the main topic, by mentioning how one Twitter account in question was continuing to harass her in January over what happened in November. Again, it does suck that Ceci was still getting harassed, and I can't condone this random dude for not leaving her alone, but it still feels a little strange that she's trying to blame Emmy or even Trey for this dude's actions. To my knowledge, they weren't telling people to go harass her, so I don't really know what this random guy's deal is. Also, at the very bottom of Ceci's document, she made an update on February 8th, just 2 days before she posted the document, where she shows a tweet from Emmy telling her followers to stop sending harassment. So while I guess it's good that she included this somewhere in her document, why didn't she place this in the encouraging harassment section? Like, why is it closer to the bottom of her document? Do you think maybe it's because if she showed proof of Emmy telling people to stop harassing her, then it would kinda shatter Ceci's narrative that Emmy was encouraging it? That's just speculation on my part, but Ceci, maybe not the best placement. And I do get that these tweets were about a separate situation, but it still pertained to harassment. Kind of important to include that in the section where you're talking about harassment, but whatever. Ceci also claims too that there were other Twitter accounts harassing her and Alex who Emmy and Trey would allegedly like and retweet, but to this day, there's never ever been any proof of this. Ceci doesn't even post proof either. She can show dozens of screenshots for unrelated fluff, but can't prove that Emmy and Trey were retweeting shitty people harassing her and Alex. Who were these accounts, Ceci? Where are they? So after that pretty flawed, controversial section, we finally get to Ceci talking about her side of the Sonic and Sega Fan Jam 2022 situation. Ceci said she didn't feel the need to go to the event until after discussing it with her husband, so she contacted the staff about whether they had an artist alley table left. Says she stayed at an Airbnb, which Trey was invited to. Then she saw Emmy tweet about the Sonic and Tails R panel happening at Fan Jam that year, which also would have involved Trey, Ryan Drummond, and Doryan Nelson. Due to her feelings and experiences with Doryan, Ceci reached out to ask Emmy if Doryan was going to go to the convention. In the screenshot, Emmy confirms this to her and even says that she talked to him about keeping his distance. Ceci herself even saying that she didn't think he would willingly interact with her. Despite having this conversation, Ceci said she still felt anxious and scared about seeing him physically again. She attempts to again villainize Emmy over being friends with Doryan, once again bringing up the hunted peas situation, but we get to the part where she decides to give more info about her side of the staff call. Here she talks about how she was going to cancel her trip to Fan Jam due to Doryan attending, so in October, she messaged Patrick and asked if they could get into a call and talk about the situation. Patrick scheduled the call with Ceci, and they had it with him and one other staff member that she doesn't name. She describes that the call began with her talking about how she felt afraid to be in the same room with Doryan, and they tried to brainstorm ways to keep him away from her. She says in bold for some reason, that she wasn't told Doryan wouldn't be in the same room with her, which she says, quote, would have solved the entire situation. So is she trying to claim that the staff just completely ignored her own words here, or is she just not being totally honest about what happened in the call? Also pointing out again, Sonic Revolution, they were in separate rooms, so the problem was easily capable of being sorted out. She claims their conversation was very friendly and they seemed understanding. Alex joined the call halfway through and was pretty agitated and a lot more brute than Ceci herself, since she said that she was shaking during the majority of the call, and claims that she should have stood her ground more in the call itself. She explains that she didn't threaten the staff to make a doc about Doryan that would blackmail them, instead trying to say that she told them about how she saw a public drama from a different community that made her question about wanting to make something about Doryan. The call would apparently end on good terms, and the staff would say that they talked to Emmy and Doryan later. Patrick would later tell Ceci about how Doryan himself chose not to go. Ceci then messaged Emmy about this and assumed that Emmy was likely upset over Doryan not going anymore. In a pretty dishonest series of exclamations and out of context screenshots, Ceci says Emmy responded to her upset and accused her of trying to get Doryan banned, even though if we remember from both Emmy and Doryan's sides, the two staff members were the ones who told them about what Ceci said. Ceci again tries to claim that she never wanted to have Doryan banned, and that she defended herself from Emmy's response. Ceci then says that Emmy responded to her messages with frustration, which she doesn't show any proof or screenshots of, mentions the hunted pea situation again, maybe it's time to move on from that, Cess, and proceeded to word and frame everything like Emmy was disregarding her feelings and lying to people in public about how Ceci never made her feelings about Doryan clear to her. Ceci shows another screenshot of Emmy explaining her side where she mentions again that she offered to talk to Doryan for Ceci, which she herself told Emmy wouldn't be necessary. Like again, she literally said in those messages that she didn't think Doryan was gonna willingly interact with her to begin with. So why was this becoming a bigger issue again? Ceci claims that Emmy would tell her that this was the worst time to speak up for herself and everyone, but in the screenshot, where does Emmy say this? If that's what Ceci was interpreting from reading Emmy's pretty rational explanation about how the situation made her feel, then this must be Ceci's issue. Like, why are specific parts underlined like Ceci was trying to highlight certain points, but the parts she underlined still don't explain anything? How did you get to this conclusion? I reread this part multiple times and I still don't understand what Ceci's trying to say here. Again, you guys can read it for yourselves, but I'm just legitimately confused here. It really does feel like Ceci purposely left out important parts that would have explained things better. Like, if Emmy was reacting with frustration, then why don't you show that? You showed screenshots of her from 5 or 6 years ago talking about Sonic porn, but you don't show messages of her allegedly being awful to you? That doesn't make any sense. Ceci then explains how Doryan working on Sonic and Tails R made her uncomfortable the whole time. She also mentions that at one point Alex was pushing her to go public about Doryan, but she decided against it because Doryan was, quote, off the platform for a long time anyways. So by her own logic, it's not worth canceling anyone if they're not even on Twitter? What? She mentions again how she was worried about passing out or vomiting if she saw Doryan at Fan Jam, and says that she didn't do anything wrong by voicing her opinions to Patrick, which unless I misread, Emmy literally never told her she wasn't allowed to do that. She also tries quoting Emmy like she told Ceci she waited to bring it up to inconvenience everyone and use her trauma as ammo, but Emmy literally never said this. Go look at the screenshot she showed and please let me know in the comments, where did Emmy say this? Ceci, why are you underlining a bunch of random crap already? You can't at least underline the part you're quoting? Again, if this is how you interpreted Emmy's messages, that's whatever, but why are you quoting her like she said it? Your brain said that! Don't you think that feels a little disingenuous? Ceci shows another screenshot of Emmy's response to her and underlines the part where she brings up how a lot of people worked on the event and put their own money into it. I guess Ceci did that to try framing it like Emmy was guilting her here, but again, it still feels like she was leaving out parts of her response to make her look worse. She continues by saying Emmy mentioned Ceci was ruining everyone's experience by speaking up. Ceci, if it was said, show it! I'm getting sick of doing this mental gymnastics. Is no one else bothered by how Ceci is showing these screenshots? Not only for how she's describing things that don't really line up to what's actually in the screenshots, but she crops them really weirdly and in multiple images. It almost makes it seem like she did this on purpose to leave out important context for things. Nah, Ceci wouldn't do that. Why would she? But getting back to the document, Ceci mentions how Patrick informed Emmy about how she threatened to post a public statement about Doryan, which was something that was mentioned by Doryan, Emmy, and even Patrick when he tweeted that email that people aren't really talking about. But Ceci tries to deny ever making this threat, claiming she didn't even have screenshots saved of anything, which after 65 pages into this document, it's a little shocking to hear that from her. and then brings up screenshots of Emmy suggesting that her and Doryan get into a call and talk. Ceci declined the offer to talk to Doryan, even though she did it twice in the past. Says the conversation ended with Emmy not believing her and making her feel guilty for speaking up after the Sonic and Tails R panel was cancelled. Ceci DM'd Emmy saying she felt awful for the panel being cancelled, and says she was sorry for what happened. She repeats her points in bold and claims that she was being misrepresented in the whole situation. The document then delves into a conversation she later had with Trey. She says she spoke with Trey about her situation with Doryan and claimed to have never tried to get him banned, but also claims she was being gaslit when talking with Trey about the events that took place. She shows a screenshot of Trey explaining his side where she underlines a part where Trey was telling her, "You speaking up isn't the issue is really the timing," which I swear was something Ceci tried claiming Emmy told her, which she had no screenshots or proof of. I think underlining that part made it look a bit worse out of context, but Trey continued on by trying to explain to Ceci about why she should have told them about this issue earlier, since they had spent a full year setting up for the panel. She then underlines another part where Trey compared the situation with Doryan about how he was also falsely accused of sexually assaulting someone in his local music scene from years ago. I understand that Ceci included and underlined this part to show that she thought it was a little inappropriate for Trey to compare these two different situations like that, but also, why are you including this really private story that Trey told you? It just seems like you were trying to add more unneeded fluff to your document than necessary. Also, you still can't show Emmy being frustrated with you, but you'll include this part? Ceci then shows a screenshot of her explaining to Trey her side of the Doryan story, and Trey points out that inconsistencies in her story can make it hard to believe her side, especially when in the face of huge allegations. Ceci then shows a DM from Trey where he says that he was well aware of everything that happened before, during, and after Fan Jam 2017, and told Ceci that he thinks that her feelings about Doryan might come from how she was assaulted by the other person who's been unnamed. Ceci shows her response to this where she tells Trey that he doesn't get to decide her feelings or where they come from, which I guess would be an understandable response to give to Trey about what he said about this really sensitive topic. However, if we go back to Ceci's Twitlonger from November, she admitted that going through that other horrible situation made her unable to heal from what happened with Doryan. So ignoring that Trey also made the same observation, this is how Ceci was feeling about the situation. These were her own words. If she wasn't comfortable with how she didn't come to this realization and someone else did, then that's fine. But why was she getting mad at Trey for this? Reading his messages from my end and also knowing him for as long as I have, I don't think he was even trying to decide her feelings here. It seemed more that he was trying to maybe help her understand where she's probably coming from. Hell, if you want to add more context, these DMs with Trey happened on November 1st, and Ceci would later post her Twitlonger on November 19th, which was 18 days after the fact. So, was Trey probably one of the first people to really say this to her, which clearly made her very upset, but then she didn't bother mentioning that she had that conversation with Trey in her Twitlonger? Obviously, you can't post screenshots in a Twitlonger, but what was holding her back from revealing that Trey had told her this back in November? Why would she then go on to word her feelings about the situation in a similar fashion to the way Trey did, when she lashed out at him for apparently deciding where her feelings are coming from? I don't get it. Moving on, their conversation then goes into a back and forth where they're trying to argue whether or not Doryan kissing Ceci on the forehead was platonic or not. It just seemed like a genuine confusion where things got heated between them, and... okay, do you honestly care at this point? This video's getting pretty lengthy. I'm 70 pages into Ceci's document, and it's taken me 3 whole fucking days just to write this part of the video. Okay, Ceci then mentions to Trey about how Doryan kissed Emmy 5 years ago, and how when she first heard the story, it made her feel used by Doryan. Why she was talking to Trey about this and not Emmy is a little confusing. And again, this was something from 5 years ago. Did she never get clarification about why this happened? Regardless, Trey gives Ceci that clarification after asking Emmy and Doryan about it, which leads to another conversation where Ceci felt that Doryan kissing Emmy after their cuddling misunderstanding didn't look good on him. Also, just to point this out again, Emmy kissing Doryan happened a day or 2 before the cuddling situation. Trey tells her that while it would sting if he was in a situation like that, he says he doesn't think it would affect a person's character based on that. Trey also mentions that he asked Doryan about what he meant by the "I like you" comment from 2017, and Doryan apparently told him that he meant it as "I like you as a person," stating he saw her closer as a friend first and foremost, along with claiming the kiss on the forehead was a platonic thing. Ceci claims that Trey's messages here were, quote, more instances of gaslighting, which is, It's a bit weird to claim. The definition of gaslighting is manipulating someone into questioning their own reality or reasoning, and reading Trey's messages, it doesn't really come off like that to me. He seems to just be trying to give Ceci clarification on certain things, because she asked, but he's also not trying to convince her of anything she doesn't want to believe. She very clearly didn't agree with or like that Trey was messaging her these things to begin with, and while it could be justified on her end, accusing Trey of gaslighting over these messages doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, unless I'm gaslighting Ceci right now by saying all of this. Again, you guys can go read these conversations in her document and judge for yourselves. Continuing, Ceci says these DMs were the last straw between her and Trey, claims that what Trey said was the most insane thing he said in the conversation, claims Doryan was lying and recontextualizing stuff, and also claims that he himself admitted to the intentions, and closes their talk with "That's enough," and "I'm done." She says Trey continued on, which she doesn't show screenshots of, instead says that she placed a boundary on the conversation and showed them resolving their issue instead. Next, she talks about another call she had with Patrick on Halloween. Patrick DM'd her on Twitter asking if they could have another call to discuss Fan Jam. Ceci was gonna bring Alex into the call again, but Patrick asked if it could be a one-on-one call instead, which Ceci claims that she and Alex both found shady. Almost like both of you must have threatened the whole staff in the previous call, but this is supposed to be about Ceci's side, so I'll just pretend that part didn't happen like she's claiming. In the call, Patrick apparently apologized to Ceci for banning her from the artist alley, which Ceci said she had no clue what he was talking about. Patrick would tell her that he sent the email impulsively about how she threatened to blackmail the staff. Patrick apparently told Ceci after speaking with Trey and Emmy that he came to the conclusion that Ceci was trying to threaten him and ban Doryan from the event. She claims to have apologized to Patrick for this, didn't want to have Doryan banned, and quote, just wanted to be in a different room. She says she felt awful about them, quote, emotionally rambling in the previous call, and says that she wasn't planning on exposing anyone. Ceci, look at where you are right now. Look at what you're doing right now. All I'm saying is actions are really speaking louder than words here. Regardless, the call apparently ended with Patrick being understanding and apologizing for jumping the gun about sending the email. They then had a positive conversation in Twitter DMs. Ceci said things seemed fine with her and Patrick, until Doryan and Emmy decided to go public about the situation, and then Patrick turned around and said the staff was threatened on Twitter. She then attempts to make a point about how fake Patrick is based on her DMs from 2022 and 2018, saying looking back at her old DMs made what Patrick did here unsurprising. She then shows a DM she sent Patrick for apologizing for putting him in a really rough situation, also saying she wished she thought things through better and in a calmer manner. Then she sort of throws Alex under the bus by saying he's a lot more impulsive than she is, and wished that she calmed him down. She reiterates that her feelings about Doryan have not changed, says sorry again, and wishes Patrick the best life has to offer. I understand she included this part here to show, look, I do forgive Patrick despite how the situation was handled. I wish nothing but the best for him. But this is the same document where earlier, she included some really awful DMs from him to make him look bad, so the good isn't really outweighing the bad here, Ceci. Anyways, next is Ceci's response to Emmy's Twitlonger or statement. She doesn't make any mention about how her own Twitlonger was the very reason Emmy decided to step in, instead trying to frame it like Emmy herself got involved just to help Doryan, saying she posted it, quote, without any screenshots of anything. She shows a section from Emmy's Twitlonger where she underlines a part where Emmy mentions Ceci saying stuff like, "This is sexual assault," and "even if I wasn't going, Doryan should be banned." And the part where it was claimed that Ceci said if Emmy had been the one who was assaulted, then they would act accordingly. Ceci says that about these quotes, she doesn't try to deny that they were ever made, she instead frames it like Patrick told these to Emmy out of context. She states that the "this is sexual assault" claim was not said by her at any point in the call, but it was actually Alex who said this. She also claims that Alex was the one who also said that Doryan should be blacklisted from the convention, ignoring the fact that she's not only throwing her own husband under the bus, again, but okay, in all reality, we can't confirm that Ceci ever said this in the call. The only people who really know what went down were the two Fan Jam staff members, Ceci and Alex, because they were actually there. Though it is a little weird that she's trying to say that she didn't make the assault comment, but Alex did. And also, it doesn't seem like she bothered correcting him either, so she just let him say this? No objections? She does say, quote, "He does not speak for me, nor do his words reflect my feelings." But she also still didn't try to stop him or be like, wait, no, don't say that, that's not what happened. The dude's your husband. He's gonna speak for you because he loves you. I assume? So why would your husband be telling a really damaging accusation about someone if he didn't hear it come directly from you? Communication is kind of a really important thing in relationships, let alone marriage. So either he's actively speaking against your own words, which is pretty fucked up and actually silencing for Ceci, or he just got the information from her. As simple as that. Might sound kinda messed up, but I do kinda wish the call got recorded or something. But I'm pretty sure if it was, the evidence would have been released at this point, or at least I hope it would have been. But getting back to the document, Ceci states that she was not in the best headspace to have this call in the first place, and says that she takes responsibility for talking in a less professional manner. Ceci then brings up the part from Emmy's Twitlonger where she says it was incredibly insensitive for Ceci to say, "We have health problems of a similar degree," claiming she wasn't trying to compete for who has the worst health or who has a shittier life, which isn't something Emmy was trying to claim either. And while I have been voicing my own opinions from time to time during Ceci's document, we finally got to the one part that I'm just gonna come out and say right now, this part really rubbed me the wrong fucking way. This is the section where Ceci attempts to victimize herself in a situation where she was the one who drugged Emmy. In Ceci's description of what happened here, around 2017, Ceci invited Emmy on a trip with 2 other friends, and this is where she once again tries to pull the card of pretending they were all super young teens in comparison to Emmy, who was 4 to 5 years older. Ceci, you were all adults at this point in time. This was June 2017. You were nearly 20. Emmy was 23. And I'm just gonna assume the other 2 friends were around the same ages too. So enough with this dramatization, I'm getting so fucking sick of it. So anyways, while these grown adults were hanging out, Emmy was in the midst of bad health problems at the time, and it got even worse when she ended up getting a really bad sunburn. Ceci tries to claim that Emmy refused sunscreen, which isn't true. Emmy would end up suffering from a high fever and actually became bedridden while still on the trip. Ceci then makes a pretty insane claim that Emmy refused to drink water and didn't like water? I visited Emmy like 5 or 6 times in person in the past 4 years. Her fucking refrigerator is always filled with water. She drinks water every fucking day. What the hell are you talking about? She refused to drink water or doesn't like water? Why? What are you saying? I feel like I've asked this like a million times while reading your document, but like, why was this part necessary to mention at all? It's not even true! There was even a part earlier where I think she mentioned that Emmy refused to wear sunblock too. But I literally asked Emmy about that years ago, and that part's not true either. Why are you lying? Why is Ceci just lying about pointless ass details like this? That doesn't make sense. Also, there is a tweet from Ceci in November 2022, trying desperately to defend herself during the drugging situation, and she literally said she bought water and soda for Emmy during the sunburn. What are you talking about? So because Emmy didn't like water and was also terrified of hospitals at the time and refused to go, I'll actually clarify the hospital part, that's actually true. Ceci again reiterates that she and the other 2 people were a bunch of teens who were actually adults and were getting overwhelmed by the situation with Emmy. So at their wits' end, Ceci and the other 2 friends would do something that would sadly affect Emmy's health for years to come. They slipped Emmy an Advil in her drink they refilled, effectively giving her medication without her consent or knowledge. Ceci tries to soften everything and not take accountability for this by claiming that the Advil probably didn't do anything because Emmy only sipped her drink. And also, it was just 1 pill. Trying to say her high fever probably went down on its own. That doesn't change anything. Ceci, you still gave Emmy medication without her consent. You can't fucking do that. She tries writing in bold that she understood this, and tells people that putting medication in someone else's drink is incredibly stupid to do. But it's contradicted by the paragraph beforehand where Ceci victim blames Emmy for not telling her immediately how the situation made her feel. What is your deal? Like, it's great that you recognize what you did was incredibly stupid and wrong, but who are you to complain about Emmy being upset at you for this? Getting back to the document, Ceci says, as an adult now, you were an adult then, she looks back at the situation and says that while Emmy wouldn't have appreciated it at the time, she thinks they should have called 911 or called an Uber to go to the hospital. She then really tries to complain about how she doesn't like that Emmy phrased it as drugging since it could carry some heavy connotations with it, almost like she gave Emmy something harmful. I get what she means here, but Advil is still a drug, and medications are drugs, so if it sounds bad when it's phrased like that, That's because it is. It's what happened. Just fucking take responsibility for your mess up and stop trying to play the victim in this situation. Jesus Christ. She then shows a DM she sent Trey after reading Emmy's Twitlonger, saying she didn't want to overstep boundaries by DMing Emmy. She tells Trey about how when she first told Emmy years ago, she seemed understanding and forgave her. She mentioned this earlier when trying to justify doing this to Emmy, and it's like, were you really expecting or wanting her to just go, "You ruined my life," as her first response? No! What's wrong with you? Trey responded by saying he appreciated her reaching out but wouldn't speak for Emmy and would just relay the message to her instead. The last thing from Emmy's Twitlonger that Ceci mentions is the part talking about the cheating situation with Alex. She continues arguing that they didn't need to share this information with everyone, and tries using the, oh, for fuck's sake, the 100p situation as an example for like the millionth time. Look, I'm sorry, but the way you guys were tweeting about the 100p situation is far from what Doryan was doing when he mentioned Alex cheating in his November statement. These two situations are not comparable and can't be used within the same context. And again, the 100p situation was resolved in private and has no connection to what was going on in November. Move on! In the DM Ceci sent Trey, she tries to argue that Doryan didn't need to specify that Alex had cheated on her, saying making mention of the cheating was in bad faith over Alex. Trey mentions Doryan not wanting to withhold details because he didn't have anything to hide and didn't want to appear dishonest. At the very bottom of all of this, she tries to call them out for using her private information for the sake of transparency, and basically passive-aggressively says, "I'm sure they will understand that all the context I had to add to defend myself is for the sake of transparency too." No comment. At the bottom of page 88, we finally reach the ending section, the aftermath of everything. Ceci begins this section by saying, "The rest of this will just be me rambling about everything that's happened since then." Ceci, I just spent 3 fucking days of my life trying to sit through, analyze, and summarize in my script 80 plus pages of you jumping from topic to topic, all while sharing screenshots that either don't line up with what you're even talking about, or are just complete fluff for the sake of making other people in your document look bad, not to mention excluding details you chose to describe in text when you easily could have shown more screenshots to help prove your points, and you're saying this is the part where you're rambling? I'm losing my mind. At the very least, she explains that there's no screenshots in this section, it's just her venting about the aftermath of everything that's happened since November. She's allowed to vent, but weirdly tries to lump in Emmy, Doryan, and Trey with all the people who have apparently been harassing her and Alex since November and February. I'm not about to say that no one was harassing her. Seriously, GamerGuide's a piece of shit and can fuck off. But it's so weird to me that she's trying to accuse Emmy's fans and friends of doing this? Emmy simply can't control all her followers' actions. That's not realistic. She mentions a lot of the same things again that I don't think hold a lot of weight, like her still trying to paint the drugging thing as something that happened when she was in her teens, but the one part that I'm not gonna take lightly is her briefly mentioning a suicide attempt in December. Look, I don't like Ceci, and I've definitely made that clear at this point in the video, but I'm not gonna fuck around with this. Ceci does not deserve to die from any of this. No one involved in this situation deserves to die. Ceci also doesn't deserve to be harassed because that literally solves nothing. Regardless of how I feel, her mental health does matter, and she does deserve to be in a better place in life. I was her friend at one point, and despite my own falling out with her, I never wished any ill will on her, and especially not this. Coming off of my own experiences with suicidal ideation, and despite my expressed frustration reading everything else, it genuinely did break my heart when I read this part of her document. And sadly, this will not be the only mention of suicide in this video. Closing out this section, Ceci says the only reason she decided to publicize this document to everyone is because not a single time up until now did the other side try to stand against her being harassed. Claims people were spreading misinformation, says she never wanted to hurt Emmy or publicize anything against Doryan, says that her life has been ruined, and tells everyone to leave her alone. And then this is where we get to the small update from February 8th, 2 days before she publicized the document, where she mentions how Emmy did make tweets calling out people to stop harassing Ceci, and that she doesn't condone anyone harassing her. I guess it's good that she included this part, but why is it at the bottom of the document? Like I said way earlier, I feel like this really should have been included in the encouraging harassment plus hypocrisy section from 47 pages ago. But even though Emmy did what she did, Ceci still says that she did nothing during these past 2 months despite DMing Trey about it, basically saying that Emmy's tweets were not enough to help because she was only addressing one thing and not everything else. Ceci then says, when you are a content creator with a big following, it is your responsibility to admonish any inappropriate behavior from your fans and friends? Ceci, again, Emmy can't control every single one of her followers, and not all of them are gonna see her tweets telling them to stop. What else could she have done? So that's just not fair for you to say this. And you should damn well know that any big content creator is incapable of controlling every single one of their fans' behaviors. You should especially be aware of this nowadays, but I'll get to that when I get to it. She shares a screenshot trying to incriminate Emmy of enabling shitty fans to go harass her, and finally ends this document with a fucking punch in the face, essentially. Please don't attack anyone mentioned. She then reiterates that Doryan is not a predator, says that Emmy has enough shit thrown at her and to please not harass her, and then says sometimes two people who are mentally ill have a shitty friendship together and hurt each other. And reiterates again, please leave everyone mentioned in this document alone. That's very nice of you, Ceci, but why is this at the bottom? I feel like this part should have been on the first page at least. There's no way you formatted this entire document the way you did, with all these gross screenshots of everything and you trying to paint all these people in the worst way possible, and then thinking putting this very important section at the very fucking bottom of everything would have done anything to help. You had to have known that this wasn't gonna work. There's no fucking way that you weren't aware that people were not gonna read this section. But anyways, the document ends with Ceci saying she wasn't trying to attack anyone, she just wanted to explain herself, defend herself, and apologize for her mistakes. Finally ending this damn document with, "Thank you for reading. It was not a pleasure." I apologize if I maybe let my personal opinions on Ceci get in the way of summarizing all of this. I was originally just gonna summarize the actual parts of her document that had to do with November, and then maybe get to the parts that were just fluff and pointless crap she shoved in. But then I realized that looking at it from top to bottom as it's laid out really helped highlight a lot of my issues with it. It's unfocused, horribly disorganized, a lot of the screenshots just don't line up with what Ceci's even trying to talk about, and overall, it's just a big 93-page mess. Again, everything is going to be linked in the description, so you can go read it for yourself if you want to see. I will say, I'm probably one of the very few people who actually sat through the entire thing. Back in February when this whole drama was, at its height, I actually did sit down and try to read it for the first time, and I got about 20 pages in before I just gave up. And that wasn't because I already didn't like Ceci, I legit was just like, okay, there has to be a reason for everyone bullying and harassing Emmy over everything. So is there any actual weight to this document? Because I didn't actually read it yet. I really tried to take my personal feelings with Ceci and just put them aside and try to view this document as unbiased as I could, but it's not possible for me to do that. And hopefully as an observer watching, if you're not involved with Ceci or Emmy personally, I really hope those people notice the same issues too. The document is just Ceci's Twitlonger again, but just excessively multiplied and filled with even more pointless rambling. But the reason I'm even bringing up that I'm probably one of the very few people who actually sat through all 93 pages of this crap is because the response it got from the community was pretty unbelievable. I wish I could say on camera right now that the community viewed this document the same way I did. Just brushed off a lot of the pointless crap that she shoved into it and maybe called her out for some of the inconsistencies and other weird claims she tried making in the document, along with calling her out for just not wanting to own up to any of the mistakes that she made back in November. I wish that's what happened, but unfortunately, it wasn't. And I'm damn positive that Ceci knew this wasn't gonna happen because she's played this game before. Scarily enough, her document actually fucking worked. Seeing the reactions to Ceci's document was almost like being stuck in a never-ending episode of The Twilight Zone. So much of the community just flipped their public opinions on Emmy. People were going after her for specific claims that weren't even made in Ceci's document to begin with. People were reading so much into what Ceci actually wrote that a lot of them just made up a bunch of the worst shit possible. Countless people were accusing Emmy of really horrible stuff like she was covering up sexual assault. Some were calling her a predator over the shitty DMs that Ceci threw into her document for no reason. And just overall, a lot of people were being fully convinced of Ceci's narrative that Emmy has always been a disingenuous and manipulative person. People who hated Emmy for years were suddenly rearing their ugly heads, and were openly going after her and spreading some really horrible misinformation about things that they didn't even have proof of. Doryan also got shit, and Trey was also sadly getting a few things, but for whatever reason, Emmy was made the primary target for a lot of immature, shitty people who probably already wanted her dead for years to begin with. Ceci's document had effectively, no matter how many times she tries to claim she didn't want this to happen, gave an outlet for all of these shitty people to go publicly harass Emmy. And unfortunately, it just got worse. About a day after Ceci's document dropped, Emmy put out a 16-page statement which didn't really help and led to more harassment coming her way. Okay, look, I love Emmy, but this first statement was not the smartest thing to do. It was rushed out, mostly text, and not really the best way to approach a lot of the horrible things that Ceci was accusing her of, along with all the other crap that Ceci's document helped spawn. I won't be looking at Emmy's initial statement in this video since it's really not that relevant anymore, especially considering the updated one she'd later post would include most of everything from that statement. And while I personally read the initial one and felt that it stood on its own very well, the general public didn't think so, and a few people even refused to read it. The online harassment kept persisting and just got really fucking bad. So Emmy decided to lock her Twitter and closed off replies to people who were following her, which was also something Ceci herself had to do between November and February. She would make one more tweet saying she was gonna go on a mental break from the site for her own health. And that was that. From my side, as someone who considers Emmy one of my personal best friends, and also being fully aware of how her physical and mental health was going at the time pretty extensively after 6 years of knowing her, this was honestly one of the darkest and most uncertain moments of my entire life. It was sad to see all this crap just being thrown at one of my best friends who I knew was totally innocent. And this ex-friend of ours had essentially ruined her public image. Over what? Was it worth it, Ceci? I know you're watching, and honestly it'd be kinda crazy if you sat through this far into the video, but was making this huge public spectacle of Emmy really worth it, just so people could leave you alone? Really? Was that worth it? 'Cause I hope it was. Like, great work. I'm not saying Ceci is not allowed to defend herself, but the way she went about it was clearly one of the most calculated and purposeful things I've ever seen. And I don't understand why no one is calling this out. Like, it's so obvious if you just sat through the whole document. And sadly, it got worse. So during the time that Emmy set her Twitter to private and is at the lowest point in her career, a random Twitter user named Starman Mars made a weird thread, using points brought up in Ceci's document by the way, where they connected that Emmy's private relationship was with none other than Ryan Drummond, the voice of Sonic the Hedgehog from 1999 to 2004. Ryan had also voiced Sonic in Emmy's fan series, Sonic and Tails R. Starman proceeded to include leaked screenshots from a private Twitter account that used to belong to Emmy, which has long since been deleted, where she was tweeting stuff to close friends of hers who were following the account. Screenshots of these tweets were leaked for years, but were often discredited due to it being associated with Lizzie Silvas, a pretty infamous figure in the community who's done so much outright illegal shit to try taking down Emmy's career. I'm not gonna dive more into that because she is not the point of this video and it could probably take up a whole video on its own, which I don't want to make, so I'll just link Emmy's 2022 statement about Lizzie in the description containing every awful thing this woman has tried doing to Emmy. And I'm also gonna add, please do not harass Lizzie for any of it either, because Emmy actually wishes for people to leave her alone despite everything she's done, so please keep that in mind when you read her Lizzie document. But getting back to this Starman guy, he uses Lizzie's same leaked screenshots to help expose Emmy and Ryan's relationship, and also try pushing the false claim from Lizzie where this relationship was an affair. I'm not gonna be looking at the entirety of Starman's thread because I do not think it's worth looking at this point in time. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people ended up seeing this random dude's thread, and as a result, it spread around. A lot. To the point where both Ryan and Emmy's names were trending, with thousands of tweets being made. For days. Put that into retrospective right now. This ex-friend of Emmy's had just posted a 93-page document that I'm sure no one actually sat down and read through, but because of some weird and false accusations that were resulting from it, along with this random person exposing this old relationship that Emmy was in nearly 6 years ago, and it just so happened to be with a public figure that everyone in the community knew, well, this led to so many dehumanizing memes and tweets being made about a relationship that no one needed to know about. And a lot of people were just clowning on the he used the voice in bed thing. Me seeing that and knowing Emmy for as long as I have, to me, that read clearly as a joke. Like, I guess for me it was obvious, but for people who don't know Emmy and are seeing these screenshots out of context, and in the wake of Ceci's defaming document about Emmy, it was just seen as ammo for everyone else. I didn't look into the trending topic when it was happening, or at least not for that long, because it just made me sick to my fucking stomach seeing people make really horrible memes and just complete garbage about not only one of my best friends, but also another person that I looked up to growing up. So it was hard for someone like me to look at random people on Twitter trying to paint these two completely innocent people in such a negative way. It just wasn't right. Meanwhile, Ceci was totally in the clear, and tried to look like the good guy in the situation by making some pretty lackluster tweets telling people to stop harassing Emmy. She also made a weird ass tweet telling people personal relationships are no one else's business except the people in them. Which, looking back, it feels like she's half trying to shame people for making fun of Emmy and Ryan's relationship, or it's just her trying to spit in Emmy's face like, haha, sure sucks having private info leak, huh? Almost makes you think that she was probably involved. Nah, there's no way. She then said she was overwhelmed by everything that was happening and asked to not be involved in the other situation that's trending, and then made a very weird claim that she didn't even want the document to be shared anymore. Then why didn't you just fucking delete it? To make it even worse, Starman made another thread trying to justify leaking all this information, which was honestly way shittier. He aired out this stuff to everyone, it went trending, some people called him out for breaching Emmy's privacy like this, and he tried justifying it by essentially saying Ryan deserves to be called out for a false accusation of cheating? What the fuck? Look, at the end of the day, guys, we didn't need to know about this relationship because nothing bad was going on. It was none of our damn business. They were both grown adults in a consenting relationship and no one was being cheated on. Like, people weren't just accusing Ryan of cheating on his wife, but some people were really accusing Emmy of cheating on her husband? What husband? Emmy's never been married. I've known her for 6 fucking years. I have never heard her talk about getting married. I've never seen any wedding pictures. Where the fuck did this come from? There was no affair that went down. And there's never gonna be proof that this was ever the case because it simply doesn't exist. Some people are probably gonna watch this part of the video and respond to me like, well, you don't know that for sure. Neither do you? But you know who would know about this relationship? One of the very people who were actually in the damn relationship and is now being forced to address it. Sometime after the trending situation, Emmy would release a quick statement addressing it and was pretty upfront about everything. She says around the time they pursued this relationship, they were already close friends for a while, Emmy was single, and Ryan had just separated from his wife. But Ryan's divorce papers said 2019. You can still separate and not officially divorced for years, guys, holy shit. So Emmy and Ryan were just dating for a brief time. And if any of you were wondering, I asked her, and she told me it was just for 8 months. She also addresses the voice thing, stating it was literally just a joke she made on her private account to a few friends, so of course it's gonna look bad out of context to thousands of people, and clarifies that that part did not actually happen, which I'm sure disappointed a lot of people who made memes about it. She ends the statement by pretty bluntly putting it, I am a 29-year-old woman, I have sex, and you are gonna have to deal with it. God damn. Yeah, in spite of how horribly out of control this situation got, I think the way Emmy addressed this was pretty well done. Like, yeah, this was no one else's business and the person who aired it out should feel ashamed of themselves. Especially when trying to speak for Emmy in a relationship that that person had no involvement or actual knowledge of. Like, what the fuck, dude? And to give you guys an example of how secretive Emmy was about this relationship, like I've mentioned earlier, I've been close friends with her for 6 whole years. And she never told me about this until after the trending bullshit happened. Why didn't she tell me? Well, first off, it was none of my fucking business. Just because I'm one of her best friends doesn't mean I'm automatically entitled to know about every relationship she's been in. But there actually is a much deeper reason why she didn't tell me. That reasoning I'm actually going to address in a later part of the video. Getting back to the Ryan statement, I was kinda shocked at how people were still dogpiling about Emmy in the quote retweets. Some trying to call her out for not bothering to address the Ceci situation at all, when that's not what the main topic of this statement was about. And Emmy would release an updated statement which I'll end up looking at later. But there were also still people just saying really dumb shit. Some of them were really trying to claim that no one actually cared about the Ryan thing. Before I muted it, I saw it trending for 2 days, and there were apparently thousands of tweets being made. So, no, objectively, people did care about it and Emmy had every right to address it, especially since even more misinformation was being spread about it. So Emmy needed to clear this stuff up because it had become such a huge mess. Ryan would even make a funny tweet about it, basically calling out people for jumping to conclusions, along with saying that he has been seeing what they've been posting. So yeah, he hasn't been ignorant about this, guys. And weirdly enough, not too long after Emmy's statement about Ryan went up, that Starman person posted another thread trying to call out Emmy for lying about some things concerning the relationship that he wasn't even in. Did he already have this ready to post in private? What the hell? It's almost like someone still in contact with a close friend of Emmy at the time was getting private info and leaking it to Starman so he'd be able to use it against her in the future. Now who would do such a thing? Ceci would even post 2 weird-ass tweets not too long after Emmy posted her statement saying, "Must be exhausting to lie all the time," and "Whatever, let's move on, lol." She deleted these shortly after, but like, what the fuck? Why did you tweet these, Cecilia? I thought you said private relationship should remain between the 2 people in that relationship. Is something wrong? Overall, this situation was stupid. We didn't need to know about this old relationship. It only spiraled out of control because nosy people couldn't help themselves and wanted to cause a huge fuss, despite what some of them may try to claim. But of course, this would not be the end of the February drama. So about a week after the Ryan statement, Emmy decided to post an updated statement about Ceci that included a lot more screenshots and other things compared to what the initial statement had. I know I usually waited to talk about the reception of the statements and everything until after I summarized them, but I'm actually going to change it around for this one because the responses that this statement got was pretty lackluster since a lot of people just refused to read it. You see, internet drama doesn't really have that long of a lifespan, so by the time Emmy was even able to post an updated statement like this, a lot of people just didn't care or disregarded it entirely. It's pretty frustrating because Emmy had gone through, being totally honest, some of the worst harassment I've ever seen a close friend of mine go through on social media. So she had every right to want to make a new statement that was clearing her name after all the horrible false accusations I kept getting thrown at her. And there are just some people who hate Emmy so much that they don't even want to hear her side. Even when she had solid proof of things in her document, they didn't care. They didn't want to hear it. To them, Ceci had cancelled Emmy for good in their eyes. So when they see her trying to set everything straight and clear up all this horrible misinformation that these very people were willing to spread for weeks, they were just gonna ignore all that and continue being blissfully ignorant and spreading all this misinformation about her. That is infuriating. Hopefully, talking about her statement in this video will make people want to maybe look back at everything with much less garbage misinformation clogging up everything. But for those who did give Emmy's statement a read, it should be noted that Emmy's actually added a few updates to it since it was initially posted. So maybe don't skip this part just in case you might miss an update she made to it. It starts out with big red text telling people to not harass Ceci or anyone else mentioned in the document. Emmy prefaces everything by saying the document has been updated to include additional context, proof, and updates that have happened since Ceci's original document went live. She asks people to take their time and read her document, and that this isn't a means to continue drama or attack anyone, and even ask people to go report others who are still throwing harassment at the other party. Emmy explains that Ceci's document was misrepresenting a lot about what happened between her and her other friends. So she mentions that when she posted her original statement, she says it was made during high emotion and that she didn't take time to gather proof. So she took time away to focus on her mental health, along with taking time to go back to her statement and add a lot more proof this time. She thanks everyone who has shown her kindness and patience, along with thanking people who did reach out to her in private to check if she was okay. Before getting into everything, Emmy recommends looking back at Doryan's original statement and her initial Twitlonger from November to help fully understand the whole situation better. She also clarifies that she will not be speaking for Doryan or anyone else's behalf for the rest of this document. The first thing Emmy decides to address is the most damaging false accusation, the covering up sexual assault claim. Emmy points out that the main issue about this accusation is how Ceci herself didn't even say this, but how this was something that was being spread on Twitter. Emmy proceeds to show the part of Ceci's document where she herself literally said what happened with Doryan was not sexual assault, and says that people claiming otherwise are speaking against Ceci's own words. Also, in case some of you might be wondering, the people at Twitter who have been throwing this false accusation towards Emmy are always referring to Doryan, not the other person who actually did assault Ceci in 2017. No one seems to be talking about that one or caring about it, which is depressing to see. Emmy brings up about how the FanJam staff directly told her about how Ceci did accuse Doryan of sexual assault, and also that she did threaten to expose Doryan. which would have led to the FanJam team being caught in the crossfire, in spite of everything Ceci's been trying to claim in her document and publicly. Alex joined the call later and apparently reaffirmed Ceci's beliefs about Doryan, which led to the inappropriate comparison about how if Emmy was the one who was assaulted, then the staff would have acted on it no questions asked. Emmy mentions that the screenshots that Ceci showed of their DMs in her document were apparently made when Ceci became aware that Emmy was told what happened in a staff call. Emmy says that she was only trying to communicate with Ceci about how she was hurt that she didn't come talk to her first instead of going to threaten the staff. Emmy mentions again about how Doryan getting banned instead would have caused her more health problems at the Sonic and Tails R panel, which she wouldn't have had time to prepare for. And if we're going off what Trey told Ceci in DMs, they were planning the panel for a full year at that point, and this call happened a few weeks before FanJam. Emmy underlines the main reason she was upset was because Ceci threatened her friends and made her wish that Ceci just communicated with her better. Shows a DM that she sent Ceci and underlines a part about how threatening the blackmail to staff wasn't fair to people who had nothing to do with what happened in 2017. Emmy even shows the same email that Patrick sent Ceci that shows he made an effort to try to hold Ceci accountable for threatening the staff. Emmy highlights the part where Ceci said in her document that she felt Emmy was essentially telling her she was ruining everyone's experience at the convention, which again is something Emmy literally never told her. Emmy even shares a DM where she pretty much told Ceci this wasn't the case, stating she was referring to how the situation was being handled at that current moment, not the whole convention itself. Emmy also has an underlined part in bold where she states the only reason she mentioned everything happening before a public event was because of how it would affect her health publicly in front of other people, which she made sure to be clear about in other conversations she had with Ceci. She also alludes to the drugging section that she goes into later. Emmy shows the same screenshot from Ceci's document, you know, the one where she underlined parts that didn't really add up to what she was talking about, because all Emmy was trying to do was just express her feelings about how Ceci had handled the situation, which led to Ceci putting words in Emmy's mouth by not only quoting something that Emmy never even said, but also tried claiming that Emmy was accusing her of using her trauma as ammo, which were Ceci's words, not Emmy's. Emmy then shows a screenshot of Ceci proceeding to basically gaslight her during the whole discussion, accusing Emmy of how there's never a good time to have an intense conversation with you, and again holding stuff against Emmy that she never even told her in DMs. Emmy also shows a screenshot where Ceci straight up accused her of acting like her Sonic series is more important than me, which was a pretty self-centered response. Emmy would respond to it by stating again that she never claimed this, and that she was only affected by the panel eventually being cancelled because of her chronic health issues. Ceci responded to that part by telling her that she didn't try to go out of her way to ruin Emmy's life, which is another weird claim from Ceci that Emmy never said herself. After showing those DMs, Emmy makes a point that this entire conversation was not about her trying to cover up anything, and says that Ceci did have every right to come forward about her feelings on the situation. She restates that she just wishes Ceci communicated with her better during all of this, especially since this involved affecting Emmy's health, once again alluding to the drugging situation. She underlines that if either party wanted to come forward about their side, then it was their personal choice because this was their stories to tell, not hers. Emmy proceeds to show the same DM that Ceci also showed, where she asked if Doryan was going to be at FanJam 2022, and highlights how she offered to talk to Doryan about keeping his distance from Ceci, just so there wouldn't be any problems. Which again, Ceci literally said she didn't think Doryan would willingly interact with her. So if she literally said this, then why did she go allegedly threaten the staff to ban Doryan, and also lash out in DMs when Emmy was simply trying to explain herself, and just wish that Ceci communicated with her better about this situation? Emmy closes off this first section by pointing out how at no point during their conversation was she trying to stop Ceci from releasing a document, or trying to come forward about any sexual assault / harassment that occurred. Again saying that she just wished Ceci communicated with her better. She says again that Ceci and Doryan are well within their right to release their sides of the stories, this was not her story to tell, and then decides to link not just Doryan's statement, but Ceci's original Twitlonger and the very 93-page document she posted in February, just so people can go read their sides for themselves. The next section Emmy talks about is her friendship with Ceci, where she first corrects the weird over-exaggeration Ceci kept making in her document about their ages. Emmy says that she met Ceci when she was 18 years old, while Emmy herself was 22. Reminder, they first contacted each other on Twitter in April of 2016, which both Emmy and Ceci show in their documents. Emmy even proceeds to show age calculators of their ages at that point in time, and it even shows that Ceci was kinda close to being 19 by the time they first spoke. Emmy further shows other tweets about Ceci tweeting about her birthday, and another one where she tweeted what her age was in 2020, just to help verify her age. So in spite of her over-exaggerating that she was a teen when they first met, Ceci was a legal adult when Emmy became her friend. Emmy also decides to shoot down any claims of power dynamics that happened between their friendship by showing her subscriber analytics from late April 2016, where she only had 6,000 subscribers, along with getting a screen grab from the web archive of her Twitter in 2017, specifying that she couldn't find a screenshot from 2016, but speculates that it was probably way shorter than it was in 2017. So Ceci was 18, about to be 19, and Emmy was 22 and only really had a semi-decent following on Twitter and YouTube. But despite her numbers even at the time, she says she still viewed Ceci as an equal. When they first became friends, she grew to consider her one of her best friends, valued her as a person, found her funny, and loved spending most nights in late calls with her, saying she cared so much about her. But this would end up changing after what happened at FanJam 2017. Emmy explains after FanJam 2017, which she's also going to reference at later parts of the document, Ceci apparently communicated pretty harshly about how she abandoned her, which caught Emmy off guard because she heard from Ceci herself that she was turning in that night. She says Ceci would suggest that Emmy never cared about her, and there was another time where even before communicating with Emmy, Ceci straight up told her that she was not happy with her, but wouldn't explain what the problem was. Emmy says Ceci would treat her passive aggressively, saying every time she did communicate with her, she would be antagonistic and combative, which just made Emmy afraid of accidentally upsetting Ceci over anything. She also mentions that on the few occasions where she would express her feelings or stand up for herself when Ceci was being aggressive, Ceci would just gaslight her about the topics by claiming she was never allowed to say how she felt, and that it was never a good time to talk to her. For the record, this is Emmy talking about how Ceci would speak to her during their friendship between 2016 to 2018. Keep that in mind, and now here's a DM from Ceci in 2022. Okay, moving on. Emmy learned quickly that Ceci was no longer a safe person to talk to in terms of handling conflict, since she was incredibly difficult to communicate with when these situations happened. Emmy would grow afraid of having any conflict with Ceci after time, and decided to just step in eggshells around her, saying if she expressed being hurt to Ceci, she would just belittle her feelings or try to use them against her later on. Remember that? Emmy decides to show an instance of this happening in June 2018 when she finally decided to open up about her feelings to Ceci when discussing the incident where Ceci claimed that Emmy abandoned her at FanJam the year prior. In these DMs, Ceci claimed that she let go of what happened there, despite using it against Emmy later in her document. Emmy then shows a time where she tried to open up about her fears of approaching Ceci about this conflict, explaining more of her context about how there was a miscommunication about what happened, admitting that this was a mistake but didn't appreciate that Ceci had thrown jabs at Emmy about it, which made her feel off at the time because this was the first real time they really fought with each other. She even mentions about walking on eggshells to her in these DMs, trying to not make her mad or upset again. She apologizes for this, saying she was sensitive in that situation because when Ceci suddenly threw these jabs at her, she felt they weren't friends, especially after the whole egg thing, which I'll delve into another time. Emmy brings up a DM of her owning up to the misunderstanding about the abandon thing at FanJam, but says that she did not appreciate Ceci's aggressiveness towards her during the whole thing, but says that she doesn't know if it matters, to which Ceci just plainly agrees. Jesus Christ. Emmy then talks about another situation that happened later that day apparently, where Ceci had used K passive-aggressively towards Emmy in a voice call, which was something Emmy opened up to her friend groups at the time that Ceci was in, saying she believes that Ceci heard this info and decided to use it against her as a result. So she approached Ceci in DMs about it, which Ceci tried to nonchalantly shrug off and didn't want to hear her out. Emmy simply tells her that it wasn't nice to say. Ceci responds, "That's not a jab, lol," to which Emmy responded that it still wasn't nice. Ceci then says there was no insult of any kind that occurred, to which Emmy brings up that you don't need to insult people to make jabs at them. Ceci pretty clearly didn't want to take responsibility for this really basic request from Emmy to not be passive-aggressive, so she just says, "Good lord, you're probably not gonna like what I have to say over this, so I'll stop here," and even says, "We're going in circles." Remember that? Actually, no wait, Ceci kept going. She basically gave Emmy shit for being hurt over the whole thing, and pretty much shows that she was still holding a grudge against her after the whole abandoning situation at FanJam. She literally gave Emmy all this shit for not wanting to apologize for K-ing her in a voice call. Good lord. By the way, you may have noticed that these conversations were on November 29th, 2017, which was not too long after FanJam. Interesting. Moving on, Emmy brings up a pretty solid point that I would even testify for, which was how Ceci's behavior towards her was pretty public to other people in their friend groups, showing that she'd DM another friend of hers, AJ, who she'd known for like 6 years at this point, who also agreed that Ceci had this weird attitude towards Emmy, with both of them concluding that this was literally just Ceci, with Emmy even admitting that at that point in time, December 2017, that she didn't even want to be Ceci's friend anymore, and they were friends for just 1 year at that point. The two of them contemplated Emmy wanting to end her friendship with Ceci then, alluding that the only thing that kept Emmy in this abusive friendship was that Ceci knew her secret at the time, which I'm assuming is referring to her relationship with Ryan. She decided to not break it off then and there, but sadly their friendship just didn't get any better after that. They would continue having conflict, with Ceci mentioning even half a year after Fan Jam that she was still mad at Emmy over everything, and accused her of how because she didn't spend a lot of time with her at Fan Jam, she felt that that was proof enough that Emmy didn't care about her. She even straight up tells Emmy that she forgot her at the hotel room, which... Wait a fucking minute. Did anyone else notice that these DMs are also on June 9th, 2018? This is literally the same day where she told Emmy that she let go of the situation. What? So did you let it go or not? Which is it, Cecilia? Well, if her recent 93-page document is anything to go off of, I guess she never did let it go, even after 5 to 6 years. But anyways, Emmy would explain to Ceci that Fan Jam 2017 was a super busy time for her, since she was running around a lot and was being pulled into different directions the whole convention, so she didn't really have much time to hang out with Ceci to begin with. Emmy also wasn't allowed to leave her table either, so was Ceci just supposed to wait around her the whole time? That doesn't sound like it would have been fun either. So why is Ceci still holding all of this against Emmy? Don't worry, it gets dumber. When Sonic Revolution 2018 was coming around, Emmy and Ceci were originally going to share a hotel room together when they were planning to go to it, but Emmy ultimately decided to stay with a close friend of hers in the area so she could save money. And since this was done ahead of time, this also gave Ceci enough time to find a plan B too, which led to her staying with another friend nearby as well. However, at the last minute, Emmy's friend would sadly be out of town that week, so Emmy wasn't able to stay at their place anymore. What made this more complicated was that Emmy's friend told her this just a week or so before the convention. By that point, her flight and appearance were already booked. Thankfully, Emmy sold a few belongings and borrowed money from a friend to help secure a hotel room, so her problem was thankfully taken care of. The one person who had an issue with this, apparently, was Ceci. Emmy didn't inform Ceci about how her plans had changed last minute, and when she proceeded to learn about this because one of Emmy's server members was staying at the same hotel, she basically went attack Emmy in DMs over it and accused her of switching plans on her without telling her. The thing was, Ceci already sorted out her situation at this point, so Emmy just didn't see a purpose in telling Ceci that her plans had changed last minute. Ceci confronted Emmy like, "Wait to lie," saying she purposely lied to her about how she couldn't afford a hotel room, and ends it with, "Really cool friendship we have going here." Emmy also passively responded, but I personally feel it was a little justified because Ceci really didn't start the conversation well to begin with. It was made worse because she continued giving Emmy even more passive aggressiveness, straight up telling Emmy that she had randomly switched up places on me. Wow, what a self-centered asshole. And again, this all happened on June 9th, 2018. What the fuck, what a crazy day. Emmy then discusses the main reason why their friendship ended in 2018. This revolved around a drama that didn't even include Ceci to begin with, but she got involved anyways, which led to her and her friends attacking Emmy on Twitter over it. Ceci had apparently only learned one side of the misunderstanding, and didn't even bother contacting Emmy for her side until the very end. Cool friendship we got going there. Days later, after subtweeting and retweeting subtweets against Emmy, Ceci would finally approach Emmy about it. At this point, however, Emmy was not having it. She stood her ground against Ceci after the whole situation and cut off their friendship. She shows a DM of her telling Ceci that the friendship was over, also saying that Ceci wasn't gonna keep doing shitty things to her and try to twist the narratives in her favor, just so she can look like the victim in the situation. Emmy says that she was tired of doing this over and over again, saying that she didn't care about Ceci's feelings in this situation, especially since Ceci had forced herself to be involved. She closes the message by saying she appreciated the friendship they had, the memories they shared, and everything that Ceci had done for her, but that Emmy herself couldn't keep doing this back and forth anymore. Ceci responded, "Nah, hold the fucking phone, caps lock LOL," and that's all Emmy showed. Emmy then addresses the part from Ceci's document where she talks about how when they reconnected, Emmy apparently told her that the screenshots she was sent about the drama were fabricated and that the people involved were all lying. Emmy clarifies that she never said this to Ceci to begin with, and also never talked about screenshots being fabricated either. To which Emmy shows another screenshot from when she ended her friendship with Ceci, where she briefly explains that the situation was just a misunderstanding, and that Ceci had made the misunderstanding, quote, way more complicated than she gave it credit for. Emmy then addresses the can't handle criticism accusation, saying she can take criticism just fine, but that she doesn't respond well to hostility or aggression from others. Ceci would apparently give this to her a lot, which is what ultimately led to their friendship ending for the first time. I.e., wait to lie, you forgot me, nah, hold the fucking phone, really cool friendship we got going here. Emmy says as time went on, she witnessed what she thought was Ceci handling conflict better. The first of which is when she messaged Doryan. Emmy saw this and assumed that Ceci had changed, and eventually decided to accept Ceci as a friend again. Though she does say that she was going to be a lot more careful with her considering the conflicts they had in their first friendship, keeping her emotional distance for a time. She said it initially took place on Twitter with them interacting publicly again, but she didn't invite Ceci back to her server and only spoke with her in private calls. Due to what happened last time, some semi-firmer boundaries were established during their second friendship, which did lead to less conflict occurring. Emmy then shows a DM from AJ again where he was shocked that Ceci and Emmy were friends again, with Emmy telling him about how she felt people deserve another chance. And even I approached her about it when we were having a private call, and I explained to her, like, do you trust Ceci? Are you sure about this? And Emmy told me the same thing, so, you know, I trusted her judgment. And seeing how I'm here making this video right now, it did not work out very well. But after Sonic Revolution 2022, Emmy felt that their friendship had began returning to normal, with them having regular calls again. She says that there were only 2 times that conflict occurred, with the first time being when Emmy shared artwork of her character in a witch outfit, which led to a weird remark from Ceci about how witchcraft is a no-no to her, and that she wouldn't be interacting with it despite calling it cute. Emmy shows a few more screenshots from this conversation, and it is, in as light of terms as I can put it, the funniest shit I've probably ever read. Like, were those emojis really necessary for driving home your point, Ceci? Trey was even in this group DM and tried to explain to Ceci about how this seemed like a very out-of-nowhere remark to make when Emmy was just showing everyone artwork that she was excited about. To which Ceci gets all weirdly defensive about it, but also accuses Trey of being defensive? Then there's a pretty golden line from Ceci where she says, "I don't think assuming someone's intent is the best way to get clarification, personally." Just gonna hold on that for a bit. The conversation even made Emmy feel bad and she tried to apologize, which Ceci says she didn't need to. Emmy then explains that while she appreciated Ceci establishing boundaries, she says that she should have approached this better instead of doing it the way she originally did, since it just made Emmy feel bad. Ceci did apologize and Emmy forgave her, so I guess this stupid situation was taken care of. Also, Ceci, didn't you literally draw Rouge in a witch outfit shortly after this weird-ass conversation? I know it was for Halloween, but damn. That's a bit of hypocrisy. The second conflict that Emmy says happened was the whole FanJam 2022 situation. Emmy goes over a lot of her feelings about the situation again, also bringing up how Ceci initially asked her if Doryan was going, saying that this communication really would have helped a lot and none of this would have ended up happening, saying again that she wasn't trying to confront her with her hurt feelings, especially since looking at all the other previous examples that she's shown us, she was very afraid of doing so considering the results from their first friendship. The conversation just didn't go well, as I discussed earlier, so Emmy decided to place a boundary and end the conversation. Then shortly after their discussion, Pasquale would apparently unfollow Emmy on Twitter, which was a common indicator for some other people that if they had conflict with Ceci, and Alex unfollowed them, that meant something was wrong, even if Ceci was still following them. So Emmy realized that Ceci likely told Alex about the conversation in her own negative way, so Alex must have took the initiative to unfollow Emmy. What a hero. After it was announced that the Sonic and Tails R panel was cancelled. Emmy does mention that Ceci did reach out to apologize, but Emmy didn't want to respond because she just didn't want to express her feelings to her again after all the other bad conversations that kept resulting from these times. Emmy had realized at this point that she made a huge mistake letting this person back into her life and it broke her heart. Ceci also tells Emmy in these DMs that she didn't need to respond, so she didn't. Also, some of you might remember that this apology was also in Ceci's document, so of course Emmy's gonna show this too. However, sometime after this apology was sent, Emmy had decided to unfollow Ceci on Twitter, so she sent another DM about it, and even claimed that her silence meant that she no longer cared about their friendship. Hey, I've seen that one before! Also, What do you mean silence? Ceci, you literally told her she didn't have to respond. Also, it's kind of strange that Ceci didn't include this part in her document. I wonder why. Moving on, we get to the FanJam 2017 section. Here, Emmy addresses the one claim, the one that Ceci said in 2018 that she let go of, but also continued giving Emmy shit for in the same day and 5 years later in her damn document, that Emmy allegedly abandoned Ceci at the hotel during FanJam. Emmy explains that on her side, after the convention ended, she was told that everyone had gone back to a nearby hotel for a gathering. However, once Emmy got there, other panelists were there, but Ceci wasn't. Emmy ended up getting a text from Ceci saying she was still back at where FanJam was held, and Emmy tried to find her a drive so she can get to the place, but Ceci ended up telling her that she was going to turn in anyways. She then shows screenshots of a conversation she later had with Ceci shortly after the convention, where it's brought up by Emmy that Ceci told her that she was turning in because she was tired, with Ceci herself saying that she didn't tell Emmy she was going to bed until later. Shortly after this, Ceci would still go around telling people that Emmy had purposely abandoned her at FanJam. Emmy was still apologetic to her and was adamant that the whole situation was just a misunderstanding. But Emmy says that according to Ceci, the amount of time it apparently took her to find her a ride at the time was proof enough that Emmy didn't care about her. Hey, I think I've seen this one too. Emmy says that while this experience was put behind them, it did make her fear what her friendship was ultimately going to lead to. And unfortunately, the same night that Ceci decided to stay in at the hotel was the same night where she was harmed by the other person. Emmy opens up about how she's also sadly been a victim of sexual assault before, and says that the way Ceci chose to word this part of her document was very disheartening to read. Even bringing up how while Ceci did try to soften the blow a bit, it didn't really change the fact that Ceci was still indirectly blaming Emmy for this horrible thing happening to her, and wording it as such in her document. Emmy says that she had every intention of getting Ceci over to the convention member gathering, but that Ceci had ultimately declined her offer for a ride. She even mentions that she spent that evening talking to Doryan that night after Ceci initially told her side of that story. So yeah, Ceci tries to word it like Emmy didn't care about her to find her a ride fast enough. Meanwhile, the same night she was yelling at Doryan because she still believes Ceci's side. Emmy then reveals that when it came to her knowing about the incident that occurred with the other unnamed person, Ceci never opened up to Emmy about what happened that night until July 2020. In these screenshots, Emmy reacted in complete disgust, anger, and even guilt, even saying she blamed herself for what happened with Ceci. But then Ceci literally reassures her that it wasn't her fault. Ceci also says in the DMs that she didn't want to tell Emmy about this for years because she didn't want to hurt her, which as Emmy puts it, is pretty heartbreaking to look back at considering the way Ceci chose to word the situation in her document. She literally told Emmy that this wasn't her fault 3 years prior, and then proceeded to repaint the story in her document like it was her fault. What the fuck? Continuing on to the support section, Emmy makes mention of the part where Ceci talks about spending specifically $1,000 on her, along with the claims about buying food. She calls out Ceci for trying to recontextualize everything like Ceci was essentially manipulated into doing these things for Emmy, when in reality, Emmy never asked and just assumed that Ceci did this out of the kindness of her heart. When it comes to the $1,000 thing, Ceci left out that this money literally came from a livestream fundraiser she did for Emmy, after she ended up being scammed by people on Patreon back in May 2017. I remember this pretty vividly because this was actually the same month I joined her server, and my very first message was me reacting to Emmy's increased numbers on Patreon before we found out that it was all just fake. Once Emmy realized the Patreon pledges weren't real, she nearly had to cancel a trip to California that she was looking forward to in June, to which Ceci, again seemingly out of the kindness of her heart, decided to help Emmy with a fundraiser to help her get funding for the trip. She provides screenshots of the event when it happened, and DMs she had with Ceci prior and after she had been scammed on Patreon. Emmy even shows screenshots of public tweets that Ceci made about the livestream that are still up to this day. What's weird to me is that Ceci spent so long in her own document trying to make it out like she was the good friend in this relationship, but she didn't bother making any mention of doing this for Emmy, instead trying to repaint the $1,000 thing like Emmy forced her to do this. This was such a genuinely nice thing she did for Emmy and she didn't bother bringing it up? Huh. Also, if the timeline adds up, the trip that Emmy took in June 2017 is I think the same one where she got that horrible sunburn. You know, the one where Ceci drugged Emmy for it. The same one where she slipped her that Advil without her consent. The one where Ceci victim blamed Emmy for it and tried to make herself look like the victim in it. You know, that one? Okay, just making sure you remember that. Emmy then delves into how when she used to live back in Ohio, due to her original home life situation, it made it difficult for her to get food. So Ceci, along with several other friends at the time, myself included, would offer the buyer food just so she can be fed. Emmy says that just like what happened with the Patreon scam, this was just something that all her friends did for her out of the kindness of their hearts. Emmy then shows screenshots of friends messaging her and asking her about her food situation at the time, and then offering the help. Emmy also makes a quick mention about how this wasn't a one-sided thing either, saying that she also bought Ceci food too. When it comes to the part of Ceci's document where she claims Emmy worked her to the point of burnout, Emmy addresses this too by showing screenshots of Ceci willingly and gladly doing commissions for her without any issue, unless she's supposed to be suffering in silence here or something. Emmy also says that if Ceci ever expressed that she was being overwhelmed by a commission from her, then Emmy would not have had an issue with that at all. Emmy brings up that, again, a lot of these gestures came from Ceci's own behalf. Emmy also mentions this was not the first time Ceci weaponized doing favors for her. Like when she tried opening up to her about her feelings in the past, Ceci attempted to weaponize the fact that she did these favors for Emmy just to guilt the shit out of her. Again, cool friendship we got going on here. Emmy then mentions the part in Ceci's document where she talks about how they had to cancel a meetup because apparently someone was attending who talked bad about Sonic and Tails R. Emmy explains that the night that Ceci invited her and Trey to her Airbnb, she was already having reservations due to her long COVID symptoms. She brings up that since being diagnosed with long COVID, it makes going to private hangouts with friends a little more challenging, much less with anyone else. Emmy explains that there was going to be a content creator who was going to the meetup and that she was uncomfortable about meeting them. Not because she hates or dislikes them, but because this person had apparently made a video covering her old situation involving Hun and P. And in that person's video, they apparently opened it by making fun of Emmy and her friend's voice acting in Sonic and Tails R, which didn't really seem appropriate for the subject matter it was focusing on at the time. Emmy said she decided to stay home instead, which had led to Ceci and her friends canceling their plans altogether because they just wanted to hang out with Emmy. Emmy claims that Ceci tried to paint the situation like she forced everyone to cancel their hangout, when that wasn't the case. Emmy just wanted to stay home because she was ill, and also didn't feel comfortable meeting certain people at the meetup. Emmy points out that while she made her feelings about the situation clear, they appeared to have gotten minimized by everyone else involved. She then shows a tweet Ceci made in response to her original statement, where Emmy pretty much stated the same version of the story here. Ceci tried calling out Emmy on Twitter by saying she didn't call her, Trey did. Emmy responds to this that she asked Trey to call Ceci on her behalf, and Emmy spoke to her through that. Emmy states that the original statement was not meant to be worded like she was being forced to go, saying that they had pleaded to cancel with the other person and said that they would tell them she preferred hanging out with us, which isn't what Emmy wanted. That's also just a shitty way to handle it. What the fuck? Emmy says that there was nothing about the situation that made her forced to go, that she appreciated that they took the time to make these arrangements so they could spend time together, but is still sad that this was seen as an inconvenience to them. Emmy then mentions how during the course of hers and Ceci's friendship, they would often discuss their problems through venting and providing support for each other. Emmy says she initially felt that Ceci was a safe person to go to during times where she felt she was getting harassed by strangers online. Ceci would also apparently vent to her about her personal beefs with other members of the Sonic community. Emmy says seeing Ceci push this idea that they only ever vented about her problems greatly misrepresented what the true nature of their friendship was. Emmy mentions some instances where she had conflict with others and would vent about it to Ceci, then talks about the situation Ceci accused her of, where she, Alex, a mutual friend of Emmy's, and two friends of Ceci's were forced to watch videos of a specific content creator. Ceci tried claiming this was hate watching, but the thing is, this was a situation where multiple people were involved and could provide their own sides. Obviously, Ceci, Alex, and even their two friends have spoken up, and they all basically say that Ceci's side is 100% true and whatnot. Okay, whatever, fine. However, they forgot to factor in that there was another person who was there. Thankfully, Trey, who was also there by the way, reached out and asked for that person to give their side of the story, which they gladly did, and Emmy shows it. Their identity was hidden. From this person's point of view, hate watching was not what was happening. They mentioned how some tea was being talked about, but for the most part, they were just hanging out. They never really got a hateful vibe because both sides were sharing stories. Other than that, this person claims that the rest of the time was spent watching meme videos and playing Sonic Adventure 2 multiplayer. That was it. So whoever this one person who's probably watching who testified for Emmy, thank you for sharing your side because it was really important. The next part Emmy brings up is when Ceci accuses her of searching her own name on Twitter to find people talking shit about her, claiming she was watching over them like a hawk. Emmy explains that as an artist, she searches her name to find support and retweet fan art occasionally. Finding mean tweets sadly comes with the territory, but clarifies that this was never her goal when searching for her name. She sadly decided to stop doing this in November to protect her mental health, and clarifies in bold that any link sharing since November has not been from her searching her name, but it did make her feel uncomfortable and watch that this was something that was even relayed to Ceci. Almost like Ceci's the one watching over Emmy's Twitter like a hawk. The next section is where Emmy addresses the two things that, by all reasoning, she did not fucking have to. I decided to skim over this when looking at Ceci's document, but she pointlessly included old ass and, more importantly, out of context screenshots of Emmy talking about Sonic shipping and claiming that she had Sonic porn. She addresses how Ceci talks about the principle of canceling people based on liking Sonic ships, and the sexualization of Sonic characters. Really controversial topics right now. Emmy points out how none of this had anything to do with the November situation, along with stating that she did not care what characters Zeus Fox or anyone else ships online, and that it was none of her business, saying that the only thing she cared about was how Zeus Fox had been continuing to harass her for 5 whole years, which is the actual reason she doesn't like him. Emmy then addresses the screenshot dating back 3 years ago of a message she sent Ceci, which she says was made in the midst of an anxiety attack because someone was trying to call her out for being a predator for commissioning an artist who apparently drew shipping art between 2 Sonic characters. Again, this is a very controversial topic that I'll probably discuss at a different time, but Emmy was just relaying her personal thoughts about the whole situation in private with Ceci because the whole thing was making her very anxious. She shared this with Ceci with the sadly false hope that she would keep it private, and Ceci proceeded to weaponize it against Emmy over the Doryan situation 3 years later. Emmy mentions that she was crying while sending this DM because she was extremely anxious since the situation had severely triggered her PTSD. Emmy says a really important part that Ceci left out of the screenshot in her document, which Emmy decided to show more screenshots of below this, was that her PTSD came from a traumatic experience of being sexually assaulted at the age of 8 by a parental figure. It's incredibly heartbreaking to read about, and while I guess I should be relieved that Ceci didn't include that part in her document because this really is something Emmy herself should talk about, she's still a piece of shit for leaving out this context just to use that screenshot against Emmy. Emmy also voices frustration over this too, and calls out Ceci for purposely cropping out that information just to weaponize it against her, along with trying to use it to prove hypocrisy over liking the Son Tails ship in the past. Emmy then makes her current stance about Son Tails very clear in the next paragraph. Unfortunately, people are still using this out of context screenshot against Emmy. I understand that people don't want to read or maybe didn't see these screenshots because she just recently added them, but holy shit guys, Emmy's not a fucking predator for liking an old ship about 2 fictional cartoon animals in the past. Please get over yourselves, and shame on you, Ceci, for doing that to her. What the fuck? Even in Emmy's own statement, she brings up how Ceci was also facing similar harassment for drawing a revealing pinup of Amy Rose on her Patreon, which was causing a lot of people to go after her. Emmy then provides screenshots of her supporting Ceci through all this harassment, and even shows DMs of her messaging Alex to get into a call with Ceci because she was still panicking. So it seems pretty goddamn hypocritical for Ceci to act super innocent in this situation when she was in Emmy's shoes at one point. After explaining her current stance on ships in the community, Emmy addresses the other pretty awful accusation that honestly only really happened because of Ceci's god-awful wording in her document, which is accusing Emmy of commissioning a minor to draw NSFW. This part can be proven as instantly untrue by just doing basic math. Ceci was 19 at the time Emmy commissioned her, and she was 18 when she met Emmy. Again, I don't care if teen is still technically in the name. 18 and 19 are not the first thing I think of when I hear teenager. What makes this accusation even more false is that there literally isn't any proof of this artwork existing anywhere. You would think that with the onslaught of people throwing this really awful accusation towards Emmy, that at least one of them would have managed to find or post solid proof of it? Well, guess what? No one did because it doesn't exist. The one time Emmy commissioned Ceci to draw a situation of a real-life encounter, which involved her OC and Sonic, was when Ceci did this sketch of the two cuddling. This was commissioned to Ceci in February 2017, which was, you know, when she was 19! So not only was Ceci not even a minor at this point, but this wasn't even NSFW. Also, I'm just gonna say it. While I'm not a fan of the person who drew this, I think the art still looks kinda cute. Sue me! Emmy then provides a quick update to this section where she shows that Ceci did at least try to address on Twitter that she wasn't a minor when this artwork was commissioned, though she still gets the age wrong and tries to play it off like, I believe I had turned 18 at this point. Ceci, you can remember crazy ass DMs from several years ago so you can dig it up and use it against people later, but you can't remember how old you were in February of 2017? Just use a calculator, Jesus Christ. It almost feels like she was leaving this part ambiguous for some other crazy people on Twitter to see it and just paint it like, well, maybe she was a minor at the time and she just doesn't remember. Don't worry, guys. Emmy decided to do the math for everyone, and it turned out Ceci was, oh, yep, I was right. She was literally 19. Whoops. Emmy also includes an updated response to the Tails thing after Ceci initially responded to her first statement. This one features tweets of Ceci pretty disgustingly denying that she conveniently cropped anything in the screenshots, and painted Ceci's response like, why would I talk about someone else's sexual assault? Maybe because you were using a cropped screenshot of Emmy in a vulnerable moment because people were saying really awful shit to her that was triggering her PTSD in relation to her sexual assault? Like, Ceci, I'm sorry, but you're kind of an awful person for trying to justify doing this. Emmy responds to this by saying what Ceci is claiming was never actually stated, saying she mentioned that the age discourse for fictional characters was dumb because she was literally helping support Ceci when she was being harassed for the same shit. Again, weird how that was another thing Ceci just left out of her document. Emmy ends this section by saying that both she and Ceci literally share the same opinions that the age discourse is dumb, and stands firm about her current views on the Tails ship not being cute to her anymore. She closes off this section by pointing out again how Ceci used a screenshot of her being emotionally vulnerable from years ago over a situation that was triggering her childhood trauma, and that Ceci chose to crop out that part just to paint Emmy in as negative a light as possible. Along with pointing out my exact issue with that part, which was where mentioning Emmy's outdated shipping opinions and other random NSFW crap had literally nothing to do with everything from November. Seriously, what the hell was the point of all this, Ceci? What's wrong with you? The next section is drugging and eating disorder, where Emmy discusses the drugging situation again, and also how Ceci leaked that private conversation in their DMs revealing details about her health that Emmy didn't consent to going public. Emmy starts this section by saying that Ceci had shared a very misleading version of the story where she desperately tried to frame herself as the victim, when in reality she was the one who drugged Emmy. Emmy explains that during this very trip, the online harassment she was getting from Lizzie Silvas was still going on, which was where she and her friends were making really awful posts about Emmy at the time. Emmy says the other parties involved were also dealing with a lot during the trip, so most of it was about handling conflicts going on with everyone in the group. Emmy shoots down several claims from Ceci's doc, explaining that this wasn't her first time going to the beach, and that she actually did put on sunscreen when a mutual friend gave it to her. However, she apparently didn't apply enough of it, which is what led to her awful sunburn. She said she'd never forget this because it left a scar on her leg for 2 years that was in the shape of a handprint. Emmy also decides to shoot down the other, well, pretty fucking stupid claims that she refused to drink water and didn't like water, since this was just a really stupid thing Ceci made up in her document. Emmy said that her mutual friend's parents were incredibly kind, and were helping her in this situation with Ceci and their 2 other friends. Eventually, Ceci would give Emmy the spiked drink, and she says that she sipped it a little, but apparently Ceci persisted that she drink the entire thing. So Emmy did, and her fever started to clear up, which she thought was a miracle at the time. It wasn't until a few months later when she brought up in a private call about how her fever suddenly went down during the trip, which led to Ceci admitting that she put medication in her drink. Emmy said that she began having a panic attack in that call, opening up about how she also had PTSD from another experience she had as a child, where she was in the hospital and was being forced to get a bunch of medication during the time. Ceci tried to tell Emmy not to freak out because the medication, quote, wasn't in her system anymore, and attempted to try justifying the decision by saying that she had no choice. That sounds familiar. Along with apparently calling Emmy childish for the way she was reacting. Once again, really cool friendship we got going on here. Emmy makes mention about how Ceci said in her document that Emmy should have just told her about the effects this had on her, but Emmy says that telling Ceci this information would not have had a positive effect for her, especially considering the other times that Emmy has tried opening up to Ceci about her feelings about important topics. Yeah, no, I don't blame Emmy for not wanting to talk to Ceci about this. Emmy states that the only reason this became public was because Ceci was outright spreading misinformation about a situation where Emmy was the one who got drugged, and also tried to claim that they just just wanted to offer help to Emmy, when Ceci was the one who fucked up her health situation in the first place. Along with Ceci trying to create the false narrative that Emmy was just behaving irrational or unreasonable. Oh yeah, there was also a small part of Ceci's document where she made mention about how Emmy ate at a restaurant just fine, and made it seem like her health problems weren't that severe. Emmy shoots this down too by saying that she was still being stressed about her OCD tendencies even when she was at the restaurant. But she was only trying to fight it at the time because I assume she still wanted to eat somewhere with her friends. Emmy then says some pretty true words about Ceci's ignorance about this by saying, "These disabilities may be invisible to others, but that doesn't mean they don't exist." Emmy says it's hard to accept her apology because Ceci was still trying to downplay the whole situation, with Ceci still trying to treat the whole thing as if she was an innocent child trying to help her adult friend, when literally all the parties involved were grown adults. Emmy mentions that Ceci publicly apologized, but was still incredibly dishonest about the situation on several occasions, and even tried suggesting that Emmy was the one withholding important elements from the story. Ceci, you drugged Emmy. That's the story, whether you like it or not. Emmy mentions how in Ceci's document, she says that Emmy did forgive and thank her about the situation, but Emmy states that she only did this to avoid even further conflict with Ceci. She also brings up how Ceci tried to paint the situation like Emmy held on to this for several years, and only came out about it once Ceci double-crossed her, which Emmy points out is a pretty self-centered thing for Ceci to do. And Ceci is one to fucking talk, holy shit. Emmy goes on to explain how this trauma has affected her, and also how it's shitty of Ceci to accuse her of holding on to this for social media points, when a lot of her personal life has been ruined by a mistake that Ceci made. Emmy goes on to describe more of her current health situation again, being diagnosed with an eating disorder, weighing 86 pounds, relying on others to help manage and handle her food, also bringing up how her awful health problems nearly caused her to cancel her fan jam appearance altogether, mostly due to Doryan needing to back out because of Ceci. Oh yeah, remember when this was about Doryan? Emmy then shows screenshots from 2018 of her asking AJ in DMs about how she should go about handling her sunburn. Then underneath are the initial tweets Ceci made back in November, trying to defend herself in this situation when people were getting mad at her for drugging Emmy, tries justifying the situation but also attempts to claim she wasn't even the one who gave Emmy the spiked drink, which Trey decided to call out after getting confirmation from Emmy herself. Ceci kinda backpedaled and then brings up something that contradicts what she said in her own document, which was when she mentioned buying Emmy soda and water. You know, that thing she apparently doesn't drink? This is pretty embarrassing to look back at. I honestly forgot that Ceci tried tweeting all this to justify the situation. Emmy also brings up how it was pretty disheartening for her to see Ceci acting like this, especially because Ceci accused Emmy of accusing her of using her own traumas as fucking ammo during the Fan Jam 2022 conversation, where she quoted Emmy on something that she never fucking said. Remember that? Emmy reiterates again that when she referred to Ceci doing all of this before a public event, she was referring to how Ceci was putting Emmy in a space where her health problems would have been compromised in front of a public crowd, since Ceci threatened to get Doryan banned, and he ultimately decided not to go. She shows a DM she sent Ceci about why she was hurt by this, along with including the original description of her health problems from her Twitlonger in November. Emmy then mentions the part where Ceci brought up how Emmy laying out her health problems to her was making it a competition. Emmy outright states that her standing up for her health was not her trying to make a competition on who has a shittier life. Emmy also makes mention of how Ceci blatantly leaked private DMs of Emmy discussing her other health problems, and how she tried to justify it by saying Emmy is very public about her health now. Emmy brings up how this, like another scenario, was her venting to Ceci in private, with, you know, the idea that Ceci wasn't gonna post this shit anywhere else. Why are you so obsessed with doing this to people, Ceci? Emmy says that she should be in control of what she's willing to post about, and also not share to the public pertaining to her health problems, even calling out Ceci for leaking info about Emmy's long COVID symptoms. Emmy also shares that she understands that Ceci didn't really get the full story on a lot of her health problems, mainly due to Emmy not wanting to reveal to her that she was the main cause of a lot of these issues, but also says that Ceci trying to discredit her health problems due to other factors was in poor taste. Emmy then goes on to show a screenshot from 2021 where she was starting to catch on to her OCD symptoms, along with noticing her recent weight loss. These messages were also a year before she caught COVID and ended up getting diagnosed with long COVID as a result. It's all just incredibly sad to read. And somehow Ceci got away with weaponizing it. The next section is harassment of Cec, where Emmy addresses how Ceci said the only reason she put out her document was to defend herself and to stop harassment from happening on her end. Emmy clarifies that the harassment that Ceci claimed she was getting was from people that Emmy wasn't even seeing in the first place. While Emmy had moved on from the situation shortly after November, Ceci was continuing to message Trey instead of her, where she was complaining about the harassment still persisting. She also apparently said in these very DMs that if Emmy or Trey didn't do something about it, then she would eventually have to to say something publicly again. Okay. You know what sucks? Trey still cared about Ceci even after everything in November, so much so that he went messaged the person she was complaining about, and pretty much told them to leave her alone. Emmy then shows the screenshot of Ceci publicly posting GamerGod's fucking horrendous tweet about her, which led to Emmy making her tweets denouncing anyone for sending harassment. Emmy also points out Ceci tweeting in February that nothing was done to stop the harassment, when just being honest, Ceci just had really unrealistic expectations on how a content creator can even control their fan base. Like I said earlier, Emmy can't control all 40,000 of her damn followers. That doesn't make any sense. Just block people and move on, Ceci. Sometimes that's all you can really do. Also, you made tweets trying to tell people to stop harassing Emmy, but that didn't manage to stop all 20,000 of your followers either. So going by her logic, if Emmy and Trey did nothing to stop the harassment Ceci was facing, then Ceci also did fuck all to stop the harassment that Emmy was getting. Emmy does bring up that Ceci did address in her document about how Emmy did post on Twitter to stop the harassment, but even Emmy's confused about why Ceci put this closer to the bottom of the document, which not a lot of people are gonna see anyways. Great work, Cecilia. Hopefully your document didn't backfire horribly. Alright, next is the first part of the aftermath section called Breach. And this is the point in Emmy's document where shit is about to get pretty fucking real and more people should know about it. Emmy starts out part 1 by bringing up how, despite Ceci saying she only made her document to defend herself and to stop harassment from happening on her end, all that harassment was subsequently sent to Emmy, which caused severe defamation of both her character and morals. Emmy mentions that during the peak of the drama, she privated her Twitter and stayed off the app for the time being so she could handle the situation privately with friends, along with speaking with mental health specialists to help her get through this insanely difficult time. This is where she makes mention about her private relationship with Ryan Drummond getting leaked during her absence, and how it supposedly went number 12 trending in the country. Reminder, when I screen capped this, it had only just started trending, and there were already over 1,000 tweets about the topic. Emmy talks about how the breach of her privacy led to constant slut-shaming, all of her intentions and life decisions being put in question, along with suffering from PTSD again due to Ceci's complete disregard of using an out-of-context screenshot of Emmy having an anxiety attack. She talks about how having people accuse her of being a predator after going through the experience she went through at age 8 even sadly led her to attempting suicide, which she addresses more of in a later section. This was all Ceci's fault. That's not me being petty or anything about this whole situation. I'm specifically referring to when it comes to this information getting leaked out in the first place. This is all Ceci's fault. Emmy shows screenshots from Ceci's Twitter where she asked people to not involve her with the other situation that's trending, along with the excerpt from her document where she makes mention of Emmy's private relationship from years ago. It would actually be pretty easy to pin all of this alone on Ceci, which I'm sure some people might say, oh, she didn't mean for that random guy on Twitter to look too deep into it. It's not like she told the guy to post that thread. No, this goes a little deeper than you guys might think. According to Emmy, Ceci has kind of been spreading around her private relationship with Ryan Drummond as far back as 2017. Emmy shares screenshots from the first person who ever told her this information in Twitter DMs. According to this person, Ceci was sharing with them very intimate details about her relationship. What? What happened with private relationships staying between the people involved, Ceci? Oh yeah, this person also leaked to Emmy that Ceci also linked information to them about a BBFA3 song they didn't release yet. A little irrelevant to everything, but it's important when you realize Ceci can't really help herself when it comes to sharing private info. Not only that, but they also leaked to Emmy about how Ceci had an alt account where she would vent about things in private, and apparently she vented about how she was upset that Emmy didn't thank her enough for the fundraiser a few months prior. That's great! Emmy then talks about how, after this person informed her that Ceci was going around leaking her relationship with Ryan, she confronted her about it in a private voice chat, and Ceci admitted to it and apologized, trying to say she was just excited for her. Some of you might be thinking, okay, it's just this one person's testimony. There's no way Ceci was going around telling a bunch of people. Nope, even as recently as 2023, Emmy got testimony from 4 other people who all said they heard the information from Ceci. Now, there's no real way to prove that Ceci was going around telling groups of people about Emmy and Ryan because, realistically speaking, not everyone screenshots or records every Discord call they're in, so there may not be any hard evidence that could probably come from this. But here's my thing. Why would there still be messages from someone dating as far back as October 2017 telling Emmy that Ceci was the one going around leaking this information to others, along with people today testifying in Emmy's document that they got this exact same information from Ceci going around around telling people. Like, why would multiple people consistently lie about this near identical situation for several years? That's pretty damn suspicious. Emmy says that Ceci tried to combat all of this by saying it was just hearsay, but still brings up that several strangers and friends of Ceci apparently still tell Emmy to this day about how they got this information from Ceci. Not to mention, Ceci herself did kind of confirm that she was the one who leaked it, but she would tweet about how she only told just one friend of hers. I mean, I guess she proved that she wasn't going around telling groups of people about it. However, she still admitted she told one person. Like, Ceci, regardless if you told one person or whole groups of people about this situation, you still told someone about it. Someone who didn't need to know. And if you're not going to take responsibility for this, then you're just trying to put the blame on the one person you're claiming you told. And even if that part was true, you're still the source of all of this becoming public information several years later. This is all your fault.
Mental stability reaches its bitter end.
This is easily the darkest and heaviest section of Emmy's entire document, and people should especially not disregard this part either. What gets revealed here is fucking disgusting, awful, and kinda terrifying. Emmy has pretty strong evidence to believe that Ceci and multiple of her friends have been keeping close tabs on her, even during the time that Emmy was on her break back in February. Ceci had publicly posted about how she had been receiving info about Emmy from her own server, along with her still receiving information from a party close to her. This was Trey. Trey still stayed in contact with Ceci even during the whole February situation. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that on its own. Trey was still trying to stay on good terms with both parties regardless of all the conflict. However, this wouldn't last very long after some private info he was sharing with Ceci somehow started leaking out to the public. Emmy managed to find clear evidence that Starman was getting leaked information about her current situation, which included her suicide attempt and other situations that was going on. It was pretty fucking scary at first that Starman was publicly leaking this information, but they immediately noticed a big issue with it. You see, Trey was only telling one person about this private information. Now, who could that have possibly been? It was Ceci. Who the fuck else would it have been? Yes, while Ceci was still talking to Trey during a time where Emmy was probably at the lowest point of her life, she was actively sending updates to the very user who aired out Emmy's private information in the first place. Emmy shows screenshots of Trey messaging Ceci, who asked Trey if Emmy actually went to a mental hospital, to which Trey confirmed that it was an outpatient facility. Ceci responded that, quote, she knew Emmy wasn't actually there because they take up your phone at the mental hospital. Emmy clarifies that during her break, she was still using Instagram and checking her server. She only ever used Twitter around this time to post her statement clarifying her relationship with Ryan, which she states wasn't her pretending to be off social media. She also says any link sharing made from Twitter came from people sending it to her on Discord, not her looking it up herself. Emmy then shows the weird-ass screenshot of the anonymous source Starman was getting updates from, along with the god-awful tweet of Starman trying to claim Emmy suicide baited him and his friends. What the actual fuck is wrong with this dude? But one screenshot in particular is Starman's anonymous source telling him stuff like, I can't keep lying for her anymore. I'm sorry. The issue is, Emmy has this screenshot unfiltered because it was literally Ceci in Trey's DMs. There's no way she would have thought she was gonna get away with this. Also, a bit more detective work was done, and it was later pieced together that the rest was likely being sent from Ceci too, because she again described the outpatient facility as a mental hospital, and she was literally filtering out everything using the same shade of piss yellow like the screenshot she has in her own fucking document! How do you even fuck this up? This is getting comical at this point. So after Emmy initially posted this statement, Ceci made a pretty half-assed response where she barely took responsibility for leaking information to Starman, and she would even post a fucking screenshot of her outright admitting she was giving this man updates. Ceci, what are you doing? And of course Emmy added that to her document because why the fuck wouldn't she? The next part of this section is a really gross part where Emmy addresses the horrendous tweets from Starman trying to publicly out Emmy for suicide baiting him and his friends. Emmy bluntly puts it that she's never done this to them directly and that she doesn't even know him or his friends in any way. Also stating the cold hard truth that these were just complete strangers online who got themselves involved in Emmy's situation. She provides the screenshot of Starman's awful tweet, and a friend of his who was also claiming this shit too, who again Emmy has never directly spoken to in her damn life. Unless they're trying to say that Emmy was suicide baiting Ceci? I guess? Even though Emmy never directly spoke to Ceci about her suicide attempt, and unfortunately, because of these two Nimrod's tweets getting traction and spreading a false narrative that Emmy faked her suicidal thoughts, Emmy then provides screenshots of her damn Google searches while she was under this bad mental state, and it's one of the most distressing things in this document. Just a question real quick to Starman and his friends, how the fuck are suicidal people supposed to prove that they're suicidal? How? People in the comments, let me know. How does someone prove that their mental health is collapsing? I didn't even know there was a way to describe it, but somehow Starman acts like he knows what it is, and apparently Emmy wasn't doing it. So please let me know. How does someone prove that they're suicidal? You sick moron. And yes, I know Starman tried to make a thread attempting to apologize for saying she suicide baited, but the apology thread doesn't really matter if you're still keeping the original tweets up, you fucking idiot. If you're truly sorry, then delete these tweets. Holy shit. Emmy then shares that she and a loved one had to call the national suicide hotlines, and they also spoke to some nurses. This is honestly disturbing as hell. We've now reached a point in cancel culture where people have to try proving they were suicidal. Jesus fucking Christ. So underneath the search history and the hotline calls, Emmy posted another update where she looks at Starman's apology thread. But I really shouldn't refer to it as an apology thread, because it was still pretty half-assed and it still tried to push the belief that Emmy wasn't suicidal. So Emmy decides to clarify that the reason she was suicidal was because Ceci had shared that Tales DM out of context from 3 years ago, which had led to dozens of people accusing her of being a predator, even though she herself has explained that she's been a victim of multiple predators in her childhood. She calls out Starman for trying to say that this was just a ruse to get his threads taken down, calls him out for not leaving her alone, and in turn inciting harassment on her. She mentions that she was going to go to the hospital, which Trey did tell Cess, but upon arriving they said that she would be stripped away from her loved ones for possibly weeks, which would not have been very good for her either. So they went to an outpatient facility at the same hospital the next day. She ends this part by saying she couldn't believe how twisted this got, and the fact that she had to defend herself or even prove that she was suicidal is just nuts. It gets worse. Not only were there people going after Emmy who were seriously suggesting that she was faking her suicidal thoughts, but also that she was faking her chronic illnesses too. One account in particular kept trying to make several cases where they attempted to doubt Emmy's legitimate OCD issues, and even tried to claim that Emmy gained money from other people to help her get specific glasses that would help her with her migraines. And then this person made a post trying to show that Emmy didn't actually have the glasses she asked people to help her get, and then proceeded to try disproving this by showing an image of Emmy where she's not even wearing the fucking glasses! I have seen her wear these glasses. Those literally are not them. Emmy has never shared a damn selfie of her wearing her migraine glasses. Why the hell would she do that? Like, would you willingly post selfies with your damn inhaler? No! This is such a stupid claim! So Emmy literally provided proof that she not only bought the damn glasses, but even included evidence of her getting diagnosed for OCD! This is so stupid! Also, something you might have noticed about that one guy's tweet doubting Emmy's health problems? Mr. Pasquale liked it? Ceci? Why did your husband like this rando's tweet? It likely got it more views and attention from him liking it too, effectively spreading even more misinformation. Uh-oh. Though Emmy does provide an update that Pasquale did apologize for liking that tweet, so I guess it's good that he didn't deny ever liking it when there's clear evidence of it. But in this same apology, he still proceeded to share his opinion on the entire situation again, and then he tried accusing Emmy of purposely posting about her Patreon not too long after the situation in November. This is a weird ass assumption. If you guys follow Emmy on Twitter long enough, she just retweets her Patreon from time to time. It's just a thing she does. She even says this and affirms that if she did retweet it not too long after the drama in November happened, then it wasn't something that was done on purpose. But you know what was done on purpose? Alex literally doing the same shit during the height of the February drama. Now, he deleted these tweets, but they were screen capped and... ugh. A little hypocritical of him to accuse Emmy of doing this when he literally did the exact same thing, and I'd argue in a much worse manner. Like, I'm pretty sure Emmy's was just a retweet, but you being all smug about how you've gained a bunch of followers over the past few days, and proceeding to promote your YouTube poops in the process? Not the best move, Mr. Morefuck. The last part of Ceci's document that Emmy addresses is her claim that Emmy had made a public spectacle of Ceci's drama, to which Emmy points out that it was Doryan who posted his statement first. The only reason she spoke up in her Twitlonger was because Ceci and Alex were continuing to tweet about an old conflict they weren't even the victims in, which even Ceci herself continued bringing up and dragging out in her own document, in a clear effort to silence Doryan's side of the situation so no one would believe him, despite Emmy already stating in her own Twitlonger that this problem has long since been taken care of. Emmy also states that she had no involvement with Doryan wanting to air out that Alex had cheated on Ceci in the past, saying he felt strongly about how this incident was intertwined with a lot that happened at Fan Jam 2017. She says Doryan takes false accusations incredibly seriously and didn't want to be accused of withholding information. Emmy says that this was his reasoning, not hers, but she still got punished for it. It's kinda weird that Ceci was trying to justify airing out private stuff onto Emmy almost like a "she started it" retort, when in reality, Emmy herself didn't even speak up first. It was Doryan. We've now reached the epilogue section of Emmy's updated statement. Emmy first closes it off by saying it pains her to see Ceci continue to recontextualize everything, along with it being difficult for her to reaffirm parts of trauma she's experienced in life. She mentions not wanting an apology from Ceci, and that she just wanted to be left alone so she doesn't lose her life. Mentions her health being incredibly unstable and alluding to the break from Twitter that she ended up taking. Then, in an updated part of the epilogue, Emmy reaffirms that she did not share this information to incite more harassment, or for the situation to continue to drag, stating that both parties don't wish to continue this. She says she was strictly here to defend herself and nothing more, telling people again to not harass any parties involved, saying she's worried of accidentally encouraging harassment. Brings up that she was driven to the point of suicide because of everything that's happened. Meanwhile, a private relationship of hers was trending for thousands of people to make horrible jokes about, and all because her trust was breached. She says if any party attempts to incite a response, that she would no longer be engaging in it. She talks about how the experience has been very traumatic for her, but that she would continue making content and take a break from Twitter, since she was feeling unsafe about it at the time. And just a refresher, this update was written in February. She said she was here to make cool things and make friends in this community still, but not at the expense of her mental health, saying she'll be working behind the scenes for the time being so she can feel safer. She ends this part by pleading to be left alone, and also asks people reading to leave Ceci alone, leave Trey alone, and to please leave Doryan alone. Yeah, remember when this was about him? Then there's one final update she decided to make in March, because Emmy was made aware of some other parts of Ceci's document that she wasn't able to tackle initially. So she decided to update the document with more points since, sadly, the harassment against her has still been ongoing since Ceci's document. Emmy mentions again that these updates were not a means of continuing drama, but more that Emmy was unable to see a few details due to how excessively long Ceci's document was. Emmy mentions that she has ADHD, which meant that some things took her a full month later to come across because that's how fucking overwhelming Ceci's document was to read. And just for the record, it took me 3 whole fucking days to analyze Ceci's 93-page document. Meanwhile, looking at Emmy's updated statement only took me 1 night. Again, I might be horribly biased, but I don't care. Thank you, Emmy. And that was basically everything that happened in February. Like I said before I read the document, a lot of people weren't really willing to give Emmy's side a chance, and likely didn't want to bother reading her statement. I hope I did a good job summarizing everything, and again, if you want to read it for yourself, it's in the description. I'm sure some people sat through all that and probably thought, Emmy's document was just as disorganized as Ceci's. I'd argue the only reason Emmy's document feels disorganized in any way is because she had to go through 93 pages of Ceci's bullshit, which was already disorganized and fluffed up to begin with. So make of that what you will. I know the video's gotten very long, but I thought I would loop the summaries back to the very person this whole situation was supposed to be about. In late March, Doryan decided to post another statement in response to what happened in February. He did delete this tweet, which I'm gonna assume is because he just wants to move on from the whole situation. But I did get sent this statement and was told that I was allowed to use it in my video. So I felt that since it happened after everything in February, it would be a good one to close with. In an updated version of this response, Doryan recaps what happened 5 to 6 years ago with Ceci, telling his side about how he cuddled with her one night, and it resulted in a misunderstanding occurring, a lot of it revolving around how both of them had defined and demonstrated platonic affection, with Doryan showing what the definition of platonic is. He says contrary to opposed belief, to put it bluntly, they weren't really familiar with each other for it to mean anything. Though he found her attractive at the time and started to like her, he didn't know her well enough to initiate a relationship. He reiterates again that when they were cuddling, he wanted to make sure she was comfortable and asked her repeatedly if she was okay with this, and apparently she kept saying she was. And Doryan decides to bring up her reasoning, which is that she thought that he was asking her if she was okay from having her nightmares, and thus the misunderstanding happened, which he was apologetic about. He then brings up the same point that Emmy brought up, which is that the people continuing to spread this rumor have no idea how Ceci actually feels about the situation, to which he provides 3 screenshots from Ceci's document, where she says it wasn't sexual assault, that she never called it sexual assault or referred to him as a predator, and the other time where she said this again. Doryan restates that Ceci had every right to feel uncomfortable, but he didn't agree with what was done in the aftermath, with her describing it in the most unflattering way possible, and going spread it around to people. Doryan points out that the people who are harassing him, and also the people associated with him, are being vindictive and acting in bad faith, and also that they don't truly live by the principle they claim to stand for, which is holding people who commit this crime accountable. Doryan then points out how Ceci actually was sexually assaulted by a different person, and none of the people harassing him have said anything about that. He then states that the amount of harassment he's faced over the years because of this, in comparison to the other person, who's basically never been held accountable, is pretty disappointing and exhausting for Doryan. Doryan says that he does respect Ceci for not wanting to reveal who did this to her, and says that it's for her to reveal her when she's ready. Doryan also pointing out that his situation with Ceci is directly linked with that other person. He says that he sympathizes with her entirely, and understands that she can't help that, but also says that he doesn't need to be constantly punished for something that he thought was mutual affection, saying it's unfair for a simple misunderstanding of cuddling to carry the same level of intensity as sexual assault, which Ceci has done in both open and private places. Doryan providing the same 2 screenshots again. Doryan stresses that rumors and false accusations are a big deal, and says that people who look like him, black people, have been accused of things like this in this country since its inception. Obviously, he takes it seriously, saying if he didn't spend the last 5 to 6 years documenting every conversation he's had about it, then he would have just become another statistic. He said he didn't say a word for 5 years straight and only did so whenever he was informed that the situation was threatened to go public. He says every aspect in the aftermath of this issue has been unnecessary, including having to make his original statement to begin with. Closes it off by reiterating again that despite everything, he wishes Ceci the best life, and sincerely hopes that she gets help for what she needs regarding her traumatic experiences. He then says he's not going to talk about this anymore going forward, and that he's going to do what he's been trying to do for the past 6 years, and that's move on.
Bring me blood and pain of a stranger's fate.
Like I said earlier, just being a friend of Emmy's, it was really disappointing to see how everything in February padded out. Hopefully I was able to make some solid points for anyone watching, and I also hope that Emmy's document was able to clear up maybe some confusion for some people who maybe read Ceci's document but were still trying to remain neutral. You know, the very few amount of people who actually sat through that whole thing. Again, if you don't want to take my word for this and you want to come to your own conclusions, then everything is going to be linked in the description for you to read for yourself, in case some of you still felt that I was missing some context or details. I tried to be as upfront as I could when discussing every statement and post, but still felt the need to correct blatant misinformation because it has gotten so fucking tiring seeing people online, especially Twitter, continue to spread misinformation since February when all of these claims were proven false long ago. I'm sure a lot of people are gonna hate me for making this video and will probably try to call me out for doing so. You know, trying to stand up for the other side that hasn't really been getting much support lately. I'm not gonna do what Ceci's been trying to do in this whole situation and trying to paint myself as a victim or some shit. I dish this out willingly, so I'll take whatever comes from me uploading this. I just hope there will be some people watching who might see where I'm coming from and can sort of understand my frustration when it comes to how this drama was handled back in February. I didn't make this video for clout or for monetary gain. I made it because one of my best friends was getting harassed relentlessly over false accusations. Her privacy was breached, her reputation was damn near destroyed, and she nearly took her life. I almost lost one of the most important people I've ever met in my entire life. Several other people would have lost a really great friend, and more importantly, a little girl almost lost her mother. Over nothing. And the main person who caused all of this, where there is proof that they were breaching Emmy's privacy, giving it to some random stranger who didn't need to know about it, who would then air it out to the public to make Emmy look worse, along with doubting her own mental health issues. That very person who did all of this does not actually give a shit about Emmy. They'll publicly say they do, but they don't. Even recently, she seemingly tried to take down Emmy using someone else's other grooming situation, and it's like, what are you doing? Really fucking praying she had nothing to do with that, because that's fucking scummy and shitty. And the most Ceci has gotten from doing all this heinous shit towards a completely innocent person is just a slap on the wrist. Where's the justice in that? Again, you can read everything for yourself and come to your own conclusions, because it's all linked in the description. And this ends the part of the video where I'm just summarizing everything, so if you just wanted to watch some jackass summarize all these documents because you didn't want to read it for yourself, then you don't have to continue watching if you don't want to. But I'm not quite done yet. This is actually the first of 2 videos, ladies and gentlemen. There's actually a lot more that I'd like to share and talk about, so stay tuned for part 2, which will hopefully be the only other drama video I ever have to make in my career. But if you thought this first video was crazy enough, you ain't seen nothing yet. So for now, thank you for sitting through what will likely be the longest scripted video I'll ever make in my entire life. And I'll see you all in part 2, because believe me when I say this, especially Ceci and Alex, because I know they're watching somewhere, you're gonna wanna see it.
Here I go, I don't know where to go again, and I think of myself.